said, I'm from the Whistling Woods International Film and Creative Arts Institute. I'm also the head of the Whistling Woods Geo VR Lab. It's something that we started a year and a half ago to develop academic content and curriculum and teaching methodologies for cinematic VR, fiction narrative storytelling in 360 VR. So I'm kind of here to talk to you about cinematic VR and a little bit about what we've been doing in the lab and where I see VR going. So before I start, couple of questions. How many of you have seen any VR content? Okay, that's pretty good. You are more than the India average. So approximately 0.3% of India has seen any VR content, right? Don't feel too worried about that, because only 3% of India has ever seen a feature film on the big screen. So it's not that far off, right? So before I get into VR, I want to talk to you a little bit, just 2 slides about the Indian media and entertainment industry and where VR will sit inside it, right? So let's just take one slide on the Indian M&A industry. So we're what you would call low value, high volume. So lots and lots of people consuming lots and lots of content, but the per unit content consumption cost is very, very low. It's how the industry is. We're the Parle G of the world, right? We're not the Oreo. So broadly, the industry comprises of these segments, and the real growth of the industry is coming from online gaming and digital media, and that's exactly where VR sits, both in gaming as well as content, digital content. So these are the 4 viewing platforms that we have as of now. So I've just classified them on a value volume scale to give you some sense of where they are placed. How much does it cost to consume say one piece of media of these platforms, and how many people are consuming it. So if you look at cinema, theatrical, very, very few people consume it, and it costs quite a lot. It's the most expensive per unit media consumption platform that we have. Then you have premium OTT, which is your Netflix and Amazon of the world. Then you've got freemium OTT, where there's some free content and some premium content. That's your Hotstar, Sony Live, Z5, etc., etc., etc. We have 30 or so platforms of those. You've got free OTT, which is your YouTube, Instagram video, TikTok. Ridiculous number of TikTok people in India. It's very unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, those exist. And this is your cable and satellite / direct to home. So this is where it is. Now we're gonna put VR into this as we go ahead, so you'll get a good sense of where VR sits. I just want to put these numbers in for you to give you a good sense of how large a market we are. So primarily your kind of main big chunks of audience that exist are in what you call bundled digital, which is they consume pay TV and only telco bundled content. So whatever the telecom company gives you free along with the thing is what people watch. So that's about 200 million. And mass consumers who have cable TV, but occasionally may consume some OTT content. So they see a good show and then they subscribe for a month to say Alt or Z5 or Amazon or Hotstar or something like that. They're not regular subscribers. That's 427 million. 427 million is the combined digital viewer base of the US and Brazil put together. And that's just our only mass consumers. So the potential that exists here is huge. And that's exactly where VR sits. Now, before we get to VR, we have to understand one factor, which is called immersion. So before we get to immersion, let me ask you one question. I'm going to make this very interactive. This is a very interactive session. I'm not a typical professor, even though I may look like one. How many senses do we have? Everybody was taught this in school, hopefully. 5. Any other answers? 6. Anything else? Okay, so yeah, here's where the problems with our education system come to fore. because we actually don't have 5 or 6 senses. In reality, we have 27 senses. And our school textbooks have never really bothered to update themselves. So, the obvious answer is 5. So sight, hearing, touch, smell and taste. But in reality, there are 27. Right? And essentially senses are based into, are broken into 2 areas. One is perception-based senses and second is organ-based senses. So perception-based senses is just a fancy way of saying that, you know, our biology hasn't progressed far enough to figure out, you know, which organ is perceiving that sense. But basically that's what it is. So there are 4 perception-based senses right now we have, which is one is time. You can, you know, the humans can sense time, but the passage of time. We may not know how much time, but we know that time has passed. Agency, control. So a good example of this is people who have motion sickness. So if they're driving the car, they don't have a problem, but if they're sitting in the car being driven by someone else, they're suddenly throwing up all over the place. Right? The bumps are the same, everything is the same, nothing has changed on the road. So what has changed? What has changed is the sense of agency, of control. Familiarity, what we all call déjà vu. We've all experienced this at some point of time. Yes. And we sense gravity. We don't know how we sense gravity because we are not really we're not really magnetic, but we're not made out of metal, even though there's a little bit of iron in all our cells. But how do we sense gravity? So these are perception-based senses, and then there's a bunch of organ-based senses. This is available on SlideShare on my LinkedIn, so you can go check it out. I'm not going to get into each one of them. But the reason why I'm talking about senses is because the next sense is immersion. So it has not yet been formally documented globally as a sense, but depending on which side of the Atlantic you are, one say it is a sense, one say it isn't a sense. But eventually, over the next 2 or 3 years, it will settle down as one of the senses that we have. Now, immersion is further broken down into 2 types of immersion. So there is technical immersion, physical or technical immersion, and cognitive immersion. So one is physically, you're immersed in something, like you are physically, technically immersed in this room, in this atmosphere. Cognitive immersion is what all of us as filmmakers and film goers have been experiencing. There's 2 kinds of cognitive immersion where your mind is immersed, right? One is a spatial immersion where you feel like you are part of the visual that you're watching. So, or if somebody tells you a story in a really compelling way and you feel like you're part of that space, that's a spatial immersion. Then there's temporal immersion, where somebody's, you're watching a film or you're watching a piece of content and you feel like you're part of the timeline. You feel like you're, living the character's journey, or you're watching that character live his or her journey. That's temporal immersion. There's spatio-temporal immersion where you get both. And the 4th one, which is the most important one, which our industry relies on, is emotional immersion. Right? When a mother cries on screen because her baby is being separated from her, you cry. That's emotional immersion. You're emotionally immersed in the content, so that mirror neuron syndrome and that empathy center of your brain kicks in. Right? Now, these are the areas that are hyperactivated when you get into VR content. Your sense of immersion is hyperactivated. I have seen people who are standing on firm ground, but if I put them in a VR headset and the scene has the camera in a helicopter, I have seen people throw up. I have seen people with vertigo fall down. Right? I have seen people who even if the camera kind of does where your horizon changes, if the camera tilts like this and they're in VR, physically the person will go like this. Yes. It's because the sense of immersion is overpowering the body's natural sense of balance. So this is something that you need to understand first as filmmakers, content creators, content experiences, and then you can start to tackle it. The biggest problems that have happened in VR so far is because people haven't tackled immersion well. Right? So once we identify that this is a very, very, very strong force that the content creator now has at his or her disposal, which honestly none of the other filmmakers in the past have, because they have always been in a framed environment where the viewer is outside the content. I mean, I'll explain to you in a sports way. All this while, you've been playing table tennis. Now you're playing tennis. Right? So all this while, you've been outside the content, watching the content. Now you are inside the content. And as filmmakers, content creators, once you understand that, then you understand how to treat the narrative or the cinematic experience. So now let's get to VR. Oh, sorry, first. And this is really more about as tastes and as technology changes, people are no longer happy with just content. Right? So we were just happy to, somehow manage to watch a film. But no, this generation, my kids, they're not happy with just content. They want the experience. Right? They want content to be accessible, affordable, authentic, cool, customized, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, they can want it. But what is happening is that the market is responding. Industry is responding, and now you have a bunch of enabling technologies that have come together in order to give the user experience that the people want, which is above just content. So AI, augmented reality, blockchain, etc., etc. If you go down this list, 99% of India's technology startups outside of fintech and food tech are in this list. 99%. Right? So it's a very, very, very strong industry that's looking at giving these kids, giving this Generation Z, millennials, whatever you want to call them, what they want, which is stuff beyond content. They want to experience things. Okay, first things first, and you will hear this a lot as any platform tries to come together, is you'll hear a lot of jargon. Don't get lost in it, right? It's very, very, very simple. What is augmented reality, what is virtual reality, and what is mixed reality? Now, there are some people who want to put all this together and call it extended reality. Let them, doesn't matter. So, virtual reality is where the real world is shut out. And you are just seeing a digital recreation that has been shot or created on a computer. Augmented reality is where you're seeing the real world and then there's digital content on top of that. Right? And mixed reality is where the digital content actually interacts with the real world. So you're able to hide things behind this chair or that kind of stuff. So this gives you a good understanding. So this is basically what you need to know. Don't otherwise get lost in the jargon, right? And this is another area that's quite important for everybody to know, which is degrees of freedom. I'm assuming everybody's got some film understanding, background, love, keen to be filmmakers here, right? So everybody understands what degrees of freedom are? 3 DOF, 6 DOF, yes, no? Wake up. Yes, no? Anybody saying no? I'm happy to explain. So a camera can move in 6 ways. It can move front, back, left, right, up, down. That's the first 3 degrees of freedom of movement the camera has. Then the camera can pan, the camera can tilt, and the camera can roll. Those are the next 3 degrees of freedom. Okay? So there's 3 DOF content, 3 degrees of freedom content, and there's 6 DOF content, 6 degrees of freedom content. So this gives you a good sense of the 6 degrees of freedom. So you have to be careful because in this case the person is larger, the content is larger than the person, you have to be careful on how you treat the degrees of freedom. Right? You don't suddenly want the kind of the entire world that you're making the person watch in VR go sideways. People will freak out. Can you imagine if suddenly you're watching me and suddenly I was sideways? Right? Your internal brain wouldn't be able to deal with it. And that's what happens. So this is another area that people need to be very, very careful about. Now, how do you approach cinematic VR? Now, any new platform, any new area, any new industry you approach it on basically three aspects. You approach it on the technology, you approach it from the business side, and then you approach it from the craft or the art or the content, right? All industries are made up of these three. There's the business, there's the tech, and there's the art, and there's the craft. Problem solving exists in VR right now because it's a new and emerging medium, but eventually the problem solving will reduce and reduce and reduce, right? So let's look at the tech. So the Gartner is a company that creates something called a Gartner hype cycle. Now this is essentially for emerging technologies. As they enter the market, they go through a particular cycle, and this Gartner hype cycle has been on for about 40 years now, and they've generally proven to be pretty right. So you have 5 phases that any emerging technology goes through. So there's the innovation trigger, there's the peak of inflated expectations, where everybody thinks that it's going to solve all the world's problems, this new technology. There's the trough of disillusionment, when people realize that, it's not going to solve all the world's problems. Then there's the slope of enlightenment, when they get back to reality, and it kind of heads onto the plateau of productivity, and then something heads off the hype cycle. When something heads off the hype cycle, it is no longer emerging and it's no longer hype. It's settled technology. So this was the Gartner hype cycle into 2017, and VR had come out of the worst area. Right? So most technologies die here. That don't have legs, they end up kind of dying here. So 3D died here, for example. It never came out of the trough of disillusionment. Right? So this is 2017, this is 2018. So as you can see, VR is no longer on the Gartner hype cycle. So it means two things. A, it is not emerging technology anymore, but it has emerged and it's not hype. So this is a strong indication that VR is here. It's here to stay. Now, a good example, a good symptom or a good outcome of a settled technology, of an emerged technology, is that you have a stabilized technology pipeline, right? Where your acquisition, post-production, distribution, technology workflows and pipelines are kind of stable. Thoda improvement hota rahega, little bit it will keep improving, but it's generally stable. So this is what it is. You can acquire 360 content with cameras which are two lenses to 16 lenses. You have in-camera stabilization, you have in-camera stitching. Then you've got, in production, post-production, you have both local stitching as well as cloud stitching. You have a whole edit and effects pipeline that's built out, and then you can finish and export to whichever format you want. Very similar to how you would do digital content. You have a distribution mechanism, so either you can download a video on a VR device and then play it back, or you can stream. So both kinds of distribution have settled down now. And then there's a bunch of head-mounted displays or viewing devices. So you've got mobile and headset, you've got what's called a standalone, you've got tethered to server, you've got location-based experiences, then you have seated VR experiences, where you sit in a chair and the chair moves and you're wearing a VR thing, and it's kind of pretty cool, actually. So this gives you a good sense that the tech is settled. So we're not grappling with technology anymore, like we were about a couple of years ago. So when we started, when the Whistling Wood Geo VR Lab started, even stitching was a pain. Now really stitching is not a pain. Most of the camera manufacturers have figured out how to stitch, and it's no longer an issue. Now you look at the business, and this is something that everybody will agree, if it doesn't work financially, it doesn't work. No matter how creative and no matter how much great content gets created in it, it needs to work as a business because somebody needs to pay for all this stuff. So I just ignore the numbers. They're all nice, everything is going up and is all fine and all good, and there's enough research out there on VR numbers. But the key slide that I actually rely on, that makes me happy, is this one. Is where Greenlight did a survey with quite a few people on, so they surveyed people, everybody, and then they also surveyed people who were current VR content consumers. And then they asked them the question, do you want to consume movies and videos in VR? So the entire world, everybody, so including VR consumers and non-VR consumers, about 75% of the people said yes, they want to. But of the VR consumers, 87% said that they want to do it. So what does this mean? It means that VR is not a letdown. Right? It's not like people get into it and they're like, this doesn't make sense, or I'm not enjoying it. It doesn't mean that. It means that it's actually working. Right? People do enjoy it. The experiential experience is good. They want to consume content. In the case of live events, the difference is about the same. So about 69% of the whole populace wants to consume live events in VR, but people who've done it already, it's 81%. And in the case of live sports, the difference is almost 20%. People who have consumed live sports in VR understand the value, understand the importance, understand how great an experience it is rather than just watching it on TV, and they want to do it. Almost 20% more than what everybody else thinks it is. So until you've experienced it, it's very difficult to actually explain to somebody what the experience is, primarily because it's very difficult for human beings, for us to understand what immersion is and what value it adds to the experience. I mean, words haven't been invented yet to describe that feeling. Now, like you have in OTT, like you have in cinema, there are multiple business models in VR, which are directly linked to the kind of the way that you consume VR content. So the bottom one is the mobile plus headset. So it's very simple. You take a cell phone, put it into a VR headset, put it over your head, and you can consume VR content. Today in India, for $110, you can be a VR consumer. A 7,000-8,000 rupee decent new smartphone is VR ready. You get a headset for about 300 bucks, 300 rupees, you're set. There is ample amount of VR content available online for free that you can consume. You can comfortably consume 10 to 15 minutes of fresh VR content every day just using a mobile and headset. So that's the bottom of the pyramid. Next you come to wireless. So there are standalone VR devices, which is essentially it's a VR wearable device which is connected to the internet through 4G or through Wi-Fi, and it doesn't really need a physical connection to a computer. So it's called a standalone. Then you've got your tethered to the server. So it's a rather large VR headset with wires going to a computer. Then you have the tethered and seated experience and the LBE, location-based entertainment. How many of you have ever experienced any location-based experience in VR? Yeah, there are hardly any in India. Globally there are a few, but in India there aren't any yet. And this is how these 5 things sit on the VR content business models scale. Right? So your mobile and headset is really, really cheap, and that's where the most of the volume is going to come. Then you've got your wireless connected HMD standalones, and then this is where your high-end content is going to come. So think of this as
what is HMD?
Head-mounted display. Right? It's like right now it's a shoebox you wear on your head, but eventually it will get better. Yeah. So think of this as YouTube content consumption. Think of this as Netflix. And then this is home theater. And then this is going out to a amusement park or something like that for a immersive location-based VR experience. So remember the platforms that we spoke about earlier, the 4 content platforms. So this is where immersion. So we did theatrical, premium, all these earlier. This is where immersive content is right now. So in volume, it's even lower than theatrical, but it costs about the same. Now, as you go ahead, this cost will start to come down. And as the cost starts to come down, the number of people consuming it will go up. And this is where it's likely to end in about 5 years from now for India. Right? So it'll cost you marginally more than premium OTT, and hence you'll have lots of content consumption. Now let's come to the most important part, which is the content. All this is fine. Technology sab theek hai, business, dhanda vanda sab barabar jordar. But if there is no content being created, nobody's creating content, you know, what the hell are going to people watch? They'll what? Just put that shoebox on their head and watch what? Right? So now this is really where you get into serious understanding of content of VR. So you have to look at the platform and how the content is informed by the nature of viewing of the platform. So cinema is captive community viewing. TV is non-captive family viewing in India. Digital is non-captive individual viewing, and VR is captive individual viewing. And that defines the kind of content being created for these platforms. So cinema is audio-visual narrative spectacle. TV gives you time for story and character development, right? Then you've got, because it's appointment viewing, you have time. You can build out a story, you can build out characters over a long period of time. Digital, because it's individual viewing, there is almost zero inhibition. You can watch what you want without being judged. Otherwise, whether it's cinema or whether it's television, you are judged by what you watch, by your friends, by your family. In the case of OTT digital, you can watch what you want. So that ensures that the content that's created is edgy. It pushes the envelope, because you will find an audience for anything, right? I mean, there was big hue and cry when Alt Balaji put out Gandhi Bath and Gandhi Bath 1 and 2. And then you looked at the numbers and you're like, wow, 46% of Gandhi Bath viewers is rural India. 39% of Gandhi Bath viewers are women. Right? So who's complaining? Why are you complaining? So it's very, 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 very strong. And that's the key thing that's also going to translate into VR. Because it's individual viewing, because nobody else knows what you're watching inside that headset, you're going to have a wide variety of content that will be created. So the captiveness of the individual viewing helps with adding more verticals to the kind of content that will be created. So, I mean, forget about the platform viewing detail, duration structure. This is more technical in nature. This is more narrative in nature. So film is primarily standalone, marginally serial. So there are few serialized films. There are quite a few, but not as many as standalone. Standalone is like 99% of film content. But television is primarily serial, marginally standalone. Digital is about 50-50. And VR and AR is likely to be similar to digital. So there will be serialized content as well as standalone content in equal measure. This is the key. So USP, larger than life audiovisual narrative spectacle. TV is appointment viewing. Digital OTT is high concept, less formulaic. Writing focused space is critical. VR is essentially immersive and interactive, is what we know right now. We are still trying to come up with what's the USP for VR content going to be other than immersive and interactive. And that's the journey that, well, us and my kids and our students and all the other filmmakers out there will take over the next 5 years. There will be a USP that will evolve over the years, right? Now, this is very interesting curve. Now, if you see the curve as such is very similar to the Gartner hype cycle. But this is actually not a technology curve. This is a psychology curve. It's called the Dunning-Kruger Effect. So it tracks knowledge, skills, and confidence on 2 axes. So when you have no knowledge, you have no confidence. Then you gain a little bit of knowledge, and suddenly your confidence shoots through the roof. And now you're standing on top of Mount Stupid. Right? And then you gain a little more knowledge, and then you realize, shit, I know nothing. Right? And then you crash into the valley of despair, and you're like, I don't know anything, I don't know what I'm doing, what is this, let me go and become an engineer. etc., etc., etc. Things start to come into your mind. Value of despair, then wisdom starts to set in, and then you get onto the slope of enlightenment, at which stage, at some stage, you will become a guru. Now, the interesting bit is, even at the peak of being guru, you're still not as confident as you were when you were standing on top of Mount Stupid. So that's something for everybody to remember. So this is where VR is right now. It has gone through this whole journey. It has come out of the valley of despair, is now on the slope of enlightenment. So now people are not expecting VR to solve all the world's problems. They're approaching it very pragmatically. They're approaching it like they would approach content creation. And almost every single type of content or platform has gone through this journey. This is another way to look at VR content. Now, content has three aspects to it. There is emotion. So, how much of an emotional experience is it? Do I have, as a viewer, do I have control over the content that I'm consuming? And what is the consumption speed of the content? Can I tweak the consumption speed? Right? Now, if you look at film, normal feature film, the viewer has no agency, has no control. Somebody's written it, bunch of people have directed it, some other people have acted in it, you have no control over any of that. You're just sitting and watching, but it's an emotional experience, and you can control the speed of consumption. Right? You're watching something on a laptop, it's boring, you want to stop, just pause it, go, come back, do something else. So you do have control over this. But if it is a game, you do have full control over content, because the content decides what you do, right? And you decide what the content does. Similarly, you can control the speed of consumption, but it's a limited emotional experience. I'm not saying it's not an emotional experience. It's very limited emotional experience in gaming, because you don't have that much of cognitive immersion in a game. You're still looking at it as always as a third person. And the third one is live content. If you're watching something live, right? You cannot change the speed of content consumption. You can't make things go faster if they're happening live, right? You can't make it go slower either. But it is an emotional experience and you do have full control. So that's live. Now, this is essentially a merger of three aspects. A combination of these will decide what kind of VR content is being created. So if you give a lot of control to the viewer to make multiple choice decisions and look here and look there and something gets triggered and whatever, multiple levels, it will become more game-like. If you take away a lot of control from the viewer, it's more film-like. If you allow the viewer to control speed, right, it's again a little more game-like. If it's live, then it's kind of different. So you have to decide how much of these three you want to, each of these circles you want to push in or pull out to determine what kind of VR content gets created. Right? Don't get too bogged down by this. It took me also a while to kind of wrap my head around it. But this is analysis that people have done over the years, all over the world. So in fact, this one was contributed by one of our global advisory board. It took me about a good week to understand it myself. Don't worry. This is more interesting. This is better for production complexity. So as a producer, you want to now, say you've got a good sense of cinematic VR content, now you want to go and create content. Right? You want to go and pitch to someone, you want to decide for yourself, ye kitna mehenga hai, kitna difficult hai, kaise karu. So you have to decide what your reality index is, what your interaction index is, and what your movement index is. So if you're going to make it rendered or simulated, so it means if you're going to make it CG in a computer on Maya, in Unity or something like that, versus just shoot it. So shooting it is easier. I put a VR camera, a 360 camera here, I shoot the room, within 5 minutes I've got the room captured. All I have to do is hide myself and other people who I don't want to be part of the scene. It's not that difficult to do, right? But if I have to create this room in a computer, it will take like a month. If I have to create all of you lifelike, if I have to create everything in a computer, it'll take a month, right? So it's harder to do it in render simulated and it's easier to do in actual. Is the viewer going to be an active observer or a passive observer? So does the content move ahead, change based on what the viewer does, where the viewer looks, what the viewer does, or the content just continues to move ahead and the viewer can look wherever he or she wants to? So if you want the viewer to be an active observer, then it's going to be high production complexity. If you want the viewer to be a passive observer, then it's low production complexity, right? And if you want free movement within the scene, so you want people to walk around in the VR world, then you're essentially creating what's called 6 degrees of freedom, volumetrically captured VR, which is far more expensive, far more intensive, far more computing heavy, everything to do, than if it's just single point, fixed point, no movement viewing, right? Where the camera may move, but the individual can't move within the scene. So you have to decide, you take these three and then build out your index, and that will give you whether this is high production complexity or low production complexity. So I would recommend anybody who wants to start, please start with low, right? Get your feet wet a little bit, make all the mistakes you want, and then move on to more complex stuff. It has taken, it's not that easy. Yeah, it's hard. So the great part is it's very, very intuitive and it's very, very natural, because when you are in a headset, when you shoot short content, you figure out why you would turn around and look at something and use that as a reference to whether the audience would, right? So you have yourself as the first subject, as the first example and subject of your own content. Because you have not seen the content while it's being shot. You cannot see the content while it's being shot. So that gives you a good, like a edge up in evaluation. Problem solving. Now this is, well, not your thing to do. This is my problem, right? But I'm just telling you about it since we are talking about cinematic VR. So in about a couple of years, this list will not exist, hopefully. So, Felix and Paul, don't take a photo of this please. Felix and Paul are one of the world's best VR content creators today. If you've seen any of their content on Oculus Studios, it's just heavenly. It's mind-blowing. It's like run out of adjectives, right? So this is their CTO's internal list of running problems in VR to fix, which I kind of managed to get a hold on. But this is quite complex, so I have narrowed it down. Yeah, now you can shoot this. I have narrowed it down to these areas. So one is standards, because there are no technical standards right now in VR. There is security that I was talking about, don't move the camera around too much, don't kind of make people throw up, etc., etc. There is acquisition and data management, because there's shitloads of data, lots of data, and acquiring it is difficult. There's the file formats workflow, and there's the software pipeline, computing requirements, awareness, and educating content creators. Now, thankfully, only these two are our problem. When I say our, I mean content creators in general. The tech companies will fix all this. For standards, you have standards bodies, and health departments will take care of standards and security, acquisition, data management between the cameras and the hard disks and the computing people of the world. You pitch Obsidian versus an HP and let them fight. Right? Put Intel in the middle as referee. Right? वो उनका problem है. So तो आग लगा के fight छोड़ दो तुम. They will solve it. It will take 6 months or so, but they will solve the problem. Similarly, with file formats, workflow and distribution, MPEG and other people will take care of somebody will come in and create a file format that is needed. Honestly, it's not our worry, because the industry is stable now, so there is effort going into fixing things. Software pipeline, again, it will continue to develop. It's hyper dynamic. There will be somebody who will come up with a new software, and there will be somebody who will come up with a better software, and somebody will come up with something else, and soon you'll be able to edit VR films on your phone, like you can do normal content now. Right? So not a problem. Our problem is these two: educating content creators and building awareness. Because if you don't do these, all this that people do goes to waste, because there are no content creators. So this is what we've been doing now for the last year and a bit. We've done a bunch of series and workshops on campus. We've made a lot of VR content, and through that we have reverse engineered a curriculum that we will start to teach. And I just want to share some initial learnings that we've developed from that. Yeah. Some key learnings that we've developed, I want to share those with you, and then eventually, it's difficult for me to talk about the entire curriculum now in 3 hours because it takes 5 weeks. But anyway, so there is no such person as a VR expert. Anybody who comes to you, friends, family, people you know, some filmmaker says, I am VR expert, does not exist. Right? It's like a unicorn. It's a joke. There are only 5 rules right now in VR. So as film schools, as us, as filmmakers, we don't like rules. But these are 5 rules that you have to follow. And I will insist that you follow them. First, don't bore people. Right? Just because you can put a headset in them and you have them, don't bore them. Don't put them in the middle of a sea with sharks around and that's it. Or don't put them on a roller coaster, or don't send them in a hot air balloon up into space because it's boring. Story batao. Right? Experience. Second, don't confuse people. VR is not a treasure hunt. Just because you have a frameless environment, don't put where the first shot is here and the second shot is there and the third shot is there and the fourth shot is there and people are just doing this. Don't do that. Right? Third and most important, don't give people whiplash. Right? Keep contextually the content between 160 degrees to 210 degrees, which is what your peripheral vision is. As VR content starts to get longer and better, people will watch it sitting down. They will not be able to turn beyond this. So don't make them keep turning around all the goal. Don't, just because you can. If you have to make them turn around, make sure there's a damn good reason that they will turn around. Make it worth their while, right? Obviously, don't make people vomit, right? Even when you make normal films, you should make people vomit, but you should definitely not make people vomit in VR, because they will vomit on you. And back up your data. There is crazy amounts of VR data, and there is nothing you can do about it if it goes. Right? There is about 6 times as much.
Yes.
So if you're shooting 1 minute in 4K and if you're shooting 1 minute in VR, there's about 6 to 8 times the amount of data that gets generated. Right? So it's just too heavy and too big, and 2 TB hard disks are a joke. They're pointless. I think we got like 60 TB hard disks now floating around office. So back up your data, right? So these are this is the fun part. Now there is some serious stuff as well. Now when you look at a VR film, stop looking at it as a film, as in a standard, typical, traditional narrative. Look at it as an experience of which the story is one part, the visuals are one part, the sound is one part, the interactivity is one part, right? You may want the proceedings to pause for a while and give people some chance to look around and then move ahead, and then you want them to make a couple of choices. You want them to look in a particular direction before the scene cuts to the next one, otherwise they lose the point of the cut, etc., etc. So keep all these things in mind, that it's an experience, right? It's not a film. Stop looking at it as a typical film standard where it's the story, the thread that holds it all together. In the case of VR, it's not that. There are multiple threads that hold it together. Sound is extremely strong in VR because you have spatial audio. Right? You use it as a way to direct attention. Oh, cinematic grammar needs to be completely rewritten for frameless content, right? Because there is no frame. So this that traditionally people used to do, it's pointless. What is this? Right? You have to make the viewer do that in their head. And that's the craft, that's the art. How are you going to make the viewer look in the way that you want, look at what you want, without feeling like he or she is being forced or directed to look there? Because if you direct attention too much, then there is another syndrome that sets in called FOMO, fear of missing out, right? And you don't want too much FOMO because then that starts to affect them as well. So this gives you a good understanding of some of the areas. The viewer's eye are your viewfinder and your frame, right? So you have to make them look where you want to. Solving people's FOMO is the big challenge, like I said. And yeah, also what I said earlier, think of why and how you would look at something and then replicate that in your film. So if you are going to do a murder scene, or if you're going to do a thriller, or if you're going to do something, try and make it as natural and intuitive as possible. Remember, you have a complete 360 world frameless environment. You can put content right on the floor if you want to. In feature films, you can't. In digital, you can't, because it's away from the consumer. Here, its consumer is inside the content. Right? So use that to your benefit. Use that to your experience, to create the experience. Every VR shot is a VFX shot. So if you have a good friend who's strong in VFX, like, marry him or her now, because they're worth their weight in gold for any VR shoots. Every VR shot is a VFX shot. And you have to treat it with that much importance, with that much patience, with that much preparation and that much planning. Right?
What is FOMO?
Fear of missing out. Sorry sir, generation gap. वो बच्चों में बोलते हैं, it's teen slang. It's called fear of missing out. FOMO. So your grandchildren probably. My children, your grandchildren. So what next, right? We've got all these learnings, there's much more learning. So Yang and Aditya will talk to you about writing for VR, direction for VR, and producing for VR. But as an overview, I don't want to get too much into that. What next? Where is this going to go? So, forget about this. Yes. So you will start to see widespread fiction narrative content being created in VR over the next few years. First generation of cinematic VR content creators to emerge in India, hopefully from next year or the year after that, which is all the kids we're training on campus. Increased festival inclusion, dedicated VR film festivals. So you already have them in Berlin, in Venice, in Canada, all over the place. Who knows? Maybe a couple of years down the line, IFI will have a VR section. Happy to help. The tech pipeline will get better. So you'll have better quality film grade sensors. You'll have cinematic lenses. You'll have 6 degrees of freedom, volumetric capture, point cloud capture. Don't get lost in them. Forget it. Just fancy words. Tech pipeline will get better. Stabilization. So the VR workflow will get more and more stable. Head-mounted displays will get better. Right now it's just this big bulky shoebox. It will get more sleeker, it will get better. We've seen it now just in the last 18 months. So much change is coming. Native spatial audio. So again, spatial audio is essentially directional audio, where you actually hear audio from like everywhere. Just like you would hear in Dolby Digital Surround or Atmos, where you hear from everywhere. It's that spatial audio. So spatial audio will come in all headsets and mobiles as a matter of course, hopefully. And then adequate computing and graphic computing power will kick in. 5G will help quality streaming, high quality streaming in VR, but again, I don't know how far away 5G is going to be. It's running into all kinds of problems right now. Thank you. Not bad, 5 minutes. So I can take 5 minutes of questions. Any questions? I can't have. Yeah. Sure. कोई भी भाषा चलेगी.
Hello. Hello sir, my name is Shubham Pandey. Actually हम सब ने VR बॉक्स की जो कंटेंट है वो थोड़े बहुत या तो देखे हैं ऐसे कि जो सस्ते वाले आते हैं, जैसे कि आपने बताया 300 रुपए वाले चालू हो जाते हैं, और बहुत अच्छा देखा है अगर अपने से ऑर्डर करके तो MI वाला 1500 रुपए का ऑर्डर किया. इसके अलावा कभी पे किया है तो मॉल वगैरह में जाकर के 250 रुपए 1.5 मिनट का दे करके आए हैं.
करेक्ट.
और उसमें देखा ये है कि जो 300 रुपए वाला मंगाया, हमें लगा कि यार इसमें क्वालिटी अच्छी क्यों नहीं दिख रही है, जबकि हम अपने YouTube में जा करके, क्योंकि अब उसके अलावा कहीं और से कंटेंट परचेस करना वो भी मुझे 2,500 से 3,000 रुपए शायद वीडियो के लग जाएंगे. तो उसमें हमने क्वालिटी को बहुत ज्यादा इंक्रीज भी किया, 2K में देख रहे हैं, उसके बावजूद जो है हमें पिक्सल्स बहुत ज्यादा खराब नजर आ रहे हैं. ऐसा लग रहा है जैसे कि हम रियल में कोई 3GP की वीडियो देख रहे हो. फिर हमने सोचा कि यार थोड़ा महंगा वाला मंगाते हैं, MI वाला देखा हमने देखा कि कंटेंट जो है अभी भी वही 3GP से थोड़ा बहुत नरिश हो गया, बस इतना ही हुआ. HTC वाइब जो कि अभी आपका रिटर्न भी था, HTC वाइब में मैंने देखा 10 में वो 1,73,000 का दिखेगा नॉर्मली 80 से 90,000 रुपए में, और जबकि उसके लिए 16 GB का कम से कम रैम, 8 GB की ग्राफिक्स कार्ड और इस तरह की चीजें जरूरी होती हैं उसके लिए. इतना सब कुछ इतना बेहतरीन तरीके से जमा होने के बावजूद, इतना महंगा होने के बावजूद अभी भी वो ज्यादा से ज्यादा क्या लग रहा था जैसे मैं 480 क्वालिटी में देख रहा हूँ. वो क्वालिटी कब बढ़ने वाली है, मतलब
गुड क्वेश्चन. सो मैं एक्चुअली स्लाइड स्किप किया. आई स्किप द स्लाइड, बट मैं नहीं करता तो आपका जवाब अपने आप आ जाता. तो एक तो 2 things. One is this is the normal graph of any emerging technology. आपको याद है मोबाइल पे कंटेंट देखते थे 5 साल पहले, कितना गंदा भद्दा सब कुछ, like nothing, it was terrible.
4G के पहले सब खराब था.
हाँ, right? 2G पे कंटेंट देखा है, right? Obviously वो buffering तो, I mean it would buffer more than it would play. So a 2-minute video would take 6 minutes to play because 4 minutes it would be buffering, right? So that's where we are in VR right now. So try and imagine where we were और अब कहाँ आ गए, right? Where आप comfortably phone पे 2-3 घंटे आराम से देख सकते हैं, ना बैटरी मरती है, ना streaming में problem होता है, वगैरह वगैरह वगैरह. So hold on, VR will get there. So that's on the hardware and the distribution piece. So we've carried with you. So at the end of this, so आप जो Vive का बोल रहे थे, so Vive का भाई है Oculus Rift, right, which is equally expensive. And between the Oculus Rift and the Oculus Go, which is what's called a standalone, there is something called the Quest. So we've carried the Quest with us. It costs about $300. You can watch the content that we've made. So we made a short fiction film, which is a thriller, and we shot the Kumbh Mela in VR.
Wow.
So I have about 7 minutes of a piece that we've created on the Kumbh, which you can watch on the Quest. That looks extremely lifelike. That's like watching an LED TV.
Wow.
It's like watching an LED TV. So don't get that disheartened. Technology बेहतर भी होगी और सस्ती भी होगी. Right? Now, about the quality. So what is the problem with YouTube? अगर आप एक फ्रेम ले लो 4K में शूट किया हुआ तो 30 MB, 30 MB का एक फ्रेम आता है. अगर जब आप 360 शूट करते हो, you are actually shooting 8 frames, right? Or 6, depending on how many cameras, how many lenses there are. It's either 6 or 8, and you're stitching it together, right? So जो overlap content है, right? जो overlap हुआ है, वो चला नहीं जाता है, वो रहता है. तो इमेजिन अब आपका एक फ्रेम हो गया, अगर आप 6 टाइम्स ले लो तो 180 MB हो गया 4K में, 24 फ्रेम्स हो गए पर सेकेंड, 25 डिजिटल में, राइट? सो नाउ इट्स 180 MB into 25. that many MB needs to be pushed through the 4G pipe for 1 second. How is it possible?
Not possible.
Not possible, right? That's why what it does, it crashes the quality to 480p, so it looks shit, right? So there is a solution to that. It has happened. It's in the market. I did a session in September on cinematic VR in IBC Amsterdam. It was globally streamed in 8K, and there are people who saw it it was absolutely crystal clear. I'll tell you how that has happened, how that has been enabled. So if I give you a video file, ये MP4 फाइल है, इसके 2 हिस्से करके दो मुझे, कैसे करोगे?
Split it out.
टाइमलाइन पे कट करोगे, राइट? अब बोलोगे, अगर बोलोगे टाइमलाइन पे कट किए बिना इसके 2 हिस्से करके दो मेरे को, तो आप कैसे करोगे? नहीं कर पाओगे, बिकॉज हम वीडियो को सिर्फ टाइम पे ट्रीट करते हैं, हम उसको विजुअली ट्रीट नहीं करते. The new file format, which is called OMAF, Omnidirectional Media Application Format, treats the video visually. Matlab, if I want to make 2 pieces out of the video, I can cut out a piece, a box out of the video, keep it on the side. So now here I have this whole video with an empty box in between. And if I hit play, both this play and that box plays. So जैसे MP4 है, वैसे there is a new file format called OMAF, Omnidirectional Media Application Format. अब इसकी जरूरत क्यों पड़ती है, right? So आप full 360 image भेज रहे हो, but at any point of time जो headset है उसमें you are seeing only 18% of the image. Your field of view is only 18%. So 82% of the image actually you are not seeing. आप देख नहीं रहे हो, but भेजना तो पड़ेगा, right? Because कब कौन turn कर ले क्या पता. That needs very high bit rate, which is almost impossible to achieve on 4G streaming. Now, if you say that, okay, I will send only the viewport, तुम सिर्फ उतना viewport देख रहे हो, मैं सिर्फ viewport बेचता हूँ, पूरा नहीं बेचता हूँ, because OMAF allows me to cut it out, right? Now, the problem is, what if I start to turn my head? Check. What if I start to turn my head? There's nothing there. Black. So they will say, okay, as someone is turning the head, we will send new content. So you need really, really low latency. Latency is the time taken between the server and the final display to send the content. That low latency, which is 20 milliseconds photon to motion, is not possible. Now what are you going to do? So you send something called viewport plus extra. So you send the viewport and you send a little bit of extra on all sides. And as the person starts to turn their head, the message goes to the server saying, boss, ये left में देख रहा है, left का content भेज. Right? So फिर वो left का content आ जाता. So that box, it shifts. So that's the next streaming technique that's going to happen. So YouTube doesn't do that right now. But there are other players that do. What is the Tile Media ka player called? Clear VR. Yeah. Clear VR does it. So download a software called on your phone called Clear VR, and Clear VR does tile streaming. So what it does is what you're going to watch, that box, it sends in very high quality, and baki ka sab jo hai na, it sends in really low quality. And as you turn your head, what is going out of your view frame, quality reduces, and what you're looking at, quality goes up. And they're able to do it over 4G. So that's what the problem is right now. Yes. So patience.
Okay.
Two more years, 1.5 years. परफेक्ट हो जाएगा तो. हाँ.
एक छोटा सा मैं अपने लोकल क्वेश्चन से करता हूँ. जैसे कि हमारे यहाँ पे जब मैंने VR मंगाया या फिर कई सारे दोस्तों ने मंगाया, तो उनकी एक प्रॉब्लम, यार चश्मा लग जाएगा ऐसे में, तो ये 10 मिनट देखने के बाद सर दर्द देने लगा मेरा. इसके ऊपर क्या होगा?
उनका मोबाइल में there is something called blue light filter. मोबाइल में there is something called blue light filter. उसको ऑन करना होता है. The mobile phone is not geared up to be seen from 3 inches away from the eyes. Not all mobile phones are. Some are, some aren't. So if you watch it on mobile phones which are not meant to be seen 3 inches away from the eyes, फिर वो eye में fatigue होता है. So check your phone if there is something called a blue light filter and turn it off. So you need to turn it on. So it filters out the blue light, because it's the blue light coming, the fluorescent blue light that's coming from the display of the phone is what causes eye fatigue. Right? So I'll show you where on Android phones I'll show you where you can find it. Most new phones have it. If your phone is manufactured in the past couple of years, all phones have blue light filter built in. Right? So
Is that also called the reading mode? Night mode?
no, it's not night mode. Is it called night mode? Yeah, maybe night mode. I don't know.
सर तो मोबाइल में जब भी वीडियो देखना तो ब्लू लाइट फिल्टर ऑन करना चाहिए.
Ideally. अगर आप आँख के बहुत पास देख रहे हो तो VR अगर कंटेंट देख रहे हो तो आपको ब्लू लाइट फिल्टर ऑन करना चाहिए. अगर दूर है तो ठीक है.
Sir, first of all, I just want to thank you for the fabulous presentation.
Thank you.
Learned a lot in just 1 hour. I wanted to ask you regarding the sound. So you mentioned.
You're covering sound?
You mentioned, just a quick question. You mentioned spatial recording, right? Spatial audio.
Spatial audio. Yeah.
So how is that captured? Is it like a binaural recording or?
No. So it's actually
I'll just complete my question. Sorry.
Yeah.
So in case, suppose you're trying to make a film or whatever in for a minute, and you want to incorporate sound design in it and record dialogue and stuff like that, how would that happen?
Okay.
Thank
so
you.
So if, for example, if we are shooting this room, right, and say I put the VR camera here, right next to the camera you put a VR mic. So right now in the world there are only two. One is by Sennheiser. It's called the Ambio. So it has one capsule which records ambience all around, and then you have 3 figure-of-8 capsules which do directional audio recording. So it essentially converts an A format ambisonic. It acquires an A format ambisonic, you convert it to B format ambisonic, and then you use it for streaming. Now what it does is, because even though it's acquiring spatial audio, you can mix spatial audio, so like you do for Dolby Digital Surround or Atmos, you can also now mix in headset if you want. So headset पहन के आपको you get a sphere, and you can actually say that ये sound इसको इधर से इधर shift करना है, वो कर सकते हैं आप, right? So if you are speaking, and if I have a lapel on you, and I have that as a separate channel, I can allocate it to where you are standing. I can even lock it to you, so if you walk, it will walk with you, right? So this is all in beta right now. So because we are in the lab, we are experiencing all this. Within the next year, all this will be public domain. This is a plugin that sits on Pro Tools. It's not very expensive. Clear VR is what? $200, right? $150, $200. Sorry, Clear nahi. Clear VR. Not very expensive, right? So, and because it's Sennheiser, and Sennheiser is now holding the whole pipeline, they're doing a damn good job. So that's one. Second is, this acquisition हो गया, mixing हो गया. अब playback में कान तो दो है, headphone पे ही आएगा या earphones पे आएगा. So what it does is, it flattens the spatial audio and then it binauralizes it. So any MP4, VR 360 MP4 has binaural audio built in. So if your player can handle binaural audio, YouTube can? No, YouTube can't. Facebook can, obviously Oculus can, almost all the other platforms can, right? If they can handle binaural audio, you will get spatial audio. Facebook spatial audio is actually very good. So you should see some of the Facebook VR stuff. It's pretty nice. Nicely done. You should, I know it will be expensive, but get onto the Oculus Studio and buy something called Notes on Blindness. It's a fantastic sound design experiment. Brilliant. Right? A lot of the time the screen is actually black and they just play with audio. Notes on Blindness, which is the other one? Yang, which is the other one? We did 2, right? One is Notes on Blindness and the other one? Okay, it'll come to me. So yeah, just get onto these VR forums and understand. So I don't want to drag on more because a couple of people after me. So Aditya is the producer of the VR lab. He's also an alumni of Whistling Woods. He's done a lot of work in the industry, and then I pulled him back into the lab to continue to do work. So he's going to talk to you about producing for VR.
everyone can hear me? It's fine? All right. So this presentation covered pretty much everything. It was very comprehensive, so my presentation is going to be cut short a little. I don't think anyone's going to complain about that. So yeah, one thing to note is that virtual reality really started in the 1980s. It's not new, it's not fancy in that way. People have been working on this tech for a very long time. And at this point, it's not really a standalone technology. Filmmaking in VR or cinematic VR is not a standalone thing. It's an amalgamation of a lot of technologies that we've been working on, a lot of people have been working on to get this happen. Change. So the point of this presentation is to just give you an overview. Yeah.
Is available in SlideShare?
No, this one isn't. I just made it yesterday.
Actually, the world of VR changes so fast that every week we need to update our presentation.
That is a very annoying thing as a producer to keep hold of, because you're working on a pipeline, and I'll get into that a little later. But anyway, the point of this presentation is to give you an overview as to what goes into it, and the challenges this new medium brings along with all the possibilities with it. So the differences between cinematic VR and full-scale VR. No, he's covered the basics of it, AR, MR, VR, and stuff like that. But we'll go a little depth into it to understand how producing for it and production for it really hampers and works. We'll also
Continue.
technical snag.
Supremacy of mind. Supremacy of human mind.
Yeah, I know. Alright, so we'll also talk about publishing and distribution. We had questions about sound, and it talked about how Facebook handles certain things, how YouTube's handles certain things, and Oculus Toll handles certain things. So we'll talk about that in a little depth. Also, since we don't have a lot of time, if you have questions at any point, just go ahead, let me know. And safety and health. Now we've already talked about that, but let's talk about further down as to how it would impact when you're creating, when you're pre-production, when you're thinking about making an experience. How do you think about and how do you handle these challenges? So, first off is the tools and tech. Now, we talked about cameras, this is one of them. Now, this particular camera has 6 lenses. Now, the idea of what does a camera has to do in VR, it basically has to take apart, it sees space in a sphere. Every time you put a VR camera in a space, it is thinking of it as a sphere. So what you have to understand is the more lenses a camera has, the more data it is available for it, and that helps us to recreate the sphere with much more adequate realism when we are actually putting it at the viewing stage. Right. The second is the ambisonic microphone. So we had a question about how do we sound, right? So this is basically that ambio mic that we talked about. Now this, again, I'll cut it short because you already heard it right away. However, when you're doing sound on a practical stage, when you're capturing for films, a lapel does not work always because it's 360. You can see things. You can't really hide a lapel if the character or your actor turns around. So every scene or every shot is a different challenge. Sometimes lapels work, sometimes a boom will have to be put in. Again, every scene and every time we worked on things, it's always different. It's never the same. There's no standard way of making things. And the third is depth data. Now this is not what we talked about yet. Now this is very crucial to understand the 3D depth, right? Right now that you see me and I see you, there's a sense of depth that you can perceive. When you see this on a flat screen, on a movie, the lenses help you give you that sense of depth. But if it's a wide lens and you see everything, it looks very flat. So you need to capture depth separately and bring it back into the system and put it in there. Now, I'll just show you an example as to why depth is important. So this is basically what depth helps you recreate and give that sense of detail. Otherwise, it looks just flat, spherical video. So this is important, and yeah. Let's talk about headsets a little. This is very important to talk about, and I'll go in little depth about this even though we've covered it. It is because when you're recreating or you're creating an experience, it is important to understand what platform you're making it for, right? So we've got phone head-mounted displays like that gentleman had bought. You put in your phone, you see things. Now this is where the mass is, as we already talked about it. And this is where if you're creating something for this, you have to understand what is possible. Now if you're making an experience for YouTube, for example, you cannot be wasting your time in recreating the sound design in 9 channels ambisonics or spatial, because it's just giving you stereo out. So where do you spend your resources needs to be decided before you go on floor. So pre-production is very important, and understanding what possibilities there are to view things on makes a lot of challenges. If you're making something for example, TV, it's not the same amount of effort you're putting in terms of quality as a cinema movie, right? You want it 2K, you want this and that. This is the other kind of head-mounted display. So this basically has everything in it. There's a computational happening in it. You have controllers to engage within it, and this is slightly obviously expensive. Then we have the PS4, right? So there is this kind of headsets are the Oculus Rift S or the Vive or the PS4 VR. Now these need a good computer to work with. You need higher graphics, you need higher things, and this lets you be very immersive in it because that's the kind of output. But this is very expensive. And this is what most of the people think of when they think of a VR experience. This is the kind of headset that comes to their mind. And then obviously we have location-based or full-form 6DoF VR experiences. Now if you're making something for this, you need to go way beyond than just capturing 360 and doing, because here you have to program the seat, you have to program it with your movie, a lot of moving parts in this. So what you're focusing on really has an impact onto the kind of money, effort, and time you'll be putting into this. And there are also treadmills. Has anyone seen Ready Player One yet? Yeah?
Yeah.
So that, if you see that movie, that pretty much tells you what the possibilities are for the next 15 years, where they're thinking of going ahead. Now at the moment in VR we have control over sight and sound, but that's not the end of it. The real interest is going to be when you can control smell and touch. When you can feel things. If you are moving around in a virtual environment, you hold a rock and you feel in your hand that, oh, okay, there is mass in it. So there are people working on this. It's called haptics, and that's going to be fun. Then let's talk about this. This is important to understand. So we've talked about 360, we've talked about 3DoF and 6DoF. This is a decent visual representation of what a cinematic video 360 VR is, as opposed to full-scale 6DoF experience. Is this now clear in your heads as to what to expect when you're making these differences? I can move on. Yeah? All right. Ooh. Immersion. Now, again, we had a long talk about immersion, the kind of things that go into it. But really, as a producer, and as a human being in general, actually, when you're thinking about immersion, you've been immersed by words in a book, you've been immersed by colors on a painting, you've been immersed by stars in the sky, right? Anything that takes you away from wherever you are, and you are in your own little world, that's basically immersion. That's how I understand it, and that's how most of the people feel. Now, when you're thinking about an idea, when you're thinking about a story to tell, it's important to understand what will really immerse you, what will really captivate you. And one key thing to understand is empathy. You have to create empathy for the viewer to feel immersed. If you put a war scene, it can be dramatic if it's done right. And it can help people understand why you should not go to war. Or on the other hand, it can have the opposite effect and can make people pretty violent. So you have to tread that line very well. You have to understand that the effects VR can have are deep. They are not just a simple, oh, it was good, or it was fun. It can be, but this is where you have to understand technical and narrative immersion. Also, regarding narrative immersion, Yang will go into depth about it, but I just wanted to make a point that we have to move beyond the traditional filmmaking mentality. We have to, immersion is not just what you've imagined, but what can be. That's really immersion. That's when you're really in it, when you're thinking about the possibilities while you're in there. And let's talk about the production pipeline. Now, this is just based on our 1 year of experience of making things, right? The most amount of time that people like to think where you spend time is the production stage, the shoot stage. But really that's the least amount of time we prefer to spend on it. For a 5-minute experience, we spend about good 3 months making it. Out of that, most of the time is in pre-production and post-production. The production really is capturing data. It's not really that time consuming if you've done your pre-production right. Because everything you're doing in pre-production and production is really to get everything proper in post. That's where the film is made. That's where you have all your tech, all your shoot, all your data coming together and amalgamating into the final experience, right? So training is also pretty important at pre-production stage for your below-the-line crew. Now you might train each other into, direction, this, cinematography, that. But it's really important to train your below-the-line crew because they have no idea what this is. They go on a shoot and they think, it's that frame, they're shooting there. But really you can see everywhere. On our very first shoot, we had a rain machine and it was very tricky to hide the rain machine because, it's a big tank. How do you put that? And then you had to teach everybody that everything is seen. So you can't have your lightmen sneaking at the back and smoking a cigarette. You have to make them understand what's what. So, and a quick note on post-production is also the fact that, like you mentioned, right, everything is heavy with VFX. But let's talk about storyboarding first. This is what really we call an equirectangular image, and this is what we achieve when we stitch all our videos together, all our lenses together. Primarily, this is what your panoramic image looks like when you take on a phone, but drawing this is not easy. Understanding perspective is not easy this way. So what we try to do storyboarding in is a cube map. This is primarily used by gamers to do texturing for things in a game, but this helps us really well because you can, this basically is divided in top, bottom, front, left, right, and back. That's how you have all these 6 together. This helps, and storyboarding is very important because we are used to watching films for a good amount of time now, 100 years. So we've pretty much understood the grammar of filmmaking, what to expect when someone says it's a close-up, or what to expect when someone says, let's do a swish pan. But when you're trying to create worlds, which is basically every scene that what we do is a world, everybody on your film needs to understand and visualize before you go on board what is happening at each part of the frame, which is basically everywhere. So this helps get all the crew on the same line, and this also helps them to start solving problems before their eyes at the shoot stage, right? So this is what we prefer to do, and sound. So we had some issues, right? So spatial sound is basically recreating the sense of space as you feel now. Right now that I'm speaking, these two speakers are blasting at you, so that's where you think the sound is coming from. But there are also the AC sound, there's this, there's that, there's someone playing on the phone or something or other. So when you're trying to recreate this, it's important to have all the kind of data you get. And ambisonics really helps us out there because you get the sound in all areas, and then you can choose to decide how do you want to get it out. Do you want to do a stereo binaural mix? Do you want the first order ambisonics, which is 4 channels? Do you want second order, which is 8 channels, and so on and so forth? So getting all the data and then making it into something which is usable is the key here. So you want to have as much data as possible. Also, this is the hardest thing to crack, sound. There's only, like he said, right, there's only one company which holds the main thing, which is Sennheiser. There is no real competition there. So we are really dependent on them. It's also very complicated to get it right. It's very complicated math, even I can't get into it. Also, sound is the most important thing to direct attention in VR. Without sound taking the headway, it just feels flat. Now, when you go watch a movie in Atmos, you can really feel the plane passing over your head with each speaker. That's the kind of effect we have to get in a headset, on a headphone. So that's where the tricky part comes in. Though it's easy to use the software, it's very difficult to design it right. That's where people earn their bucks, right? To get that feeling right. So that's a note that you should always have in mind. Get a good sound guy. Don't skimp out on that. And yeah, let's talk about post. So we talked about the 6 times of the regular filmmaking data that we generate. We need more hard disks, we need more things, but where really you're spending all this thing is each camera that you use has 6 lenses. Each lens is being recorded separately. Then you go on the stage of stitching it together. Then you fix all the stitching errors and get the final one. Then you have to do VFX for every shot that you've done. Then if you have CG elements, then you'll do that, or more visual effects scenes. And then all the sound data. So when you add all this together, just for a 4-minute thing, it's a lot of task. So your DIT guy has to be very good. And editing is a big task. Editing is not easy because in a frame you know what the grammar is. You know when you want to cut, when you want to do this to get a desired effect. Now if I were to do a mid-shot to close-up shot cut, it feels okay on a regular film. But if I do the same in VR, it's almost like a jump scare. You don't want that when you have a regular scene with a conversation. We're talking right now, and you cut to a close, you're like, go away. So the grammar for editing is evolving, it's changing, and you have to really understand that what you're editing is not a scene or a shot, it's a world. Every time you cut, you are entering into a different world. And that has to feel seamless. That has to feel natural. So it's a very organic process that way. You have to keep doing it, redoing it. For the Kumbh, we had 9 versions. Because you would show it to somebody, they feel, oh no, this can't be. You show it to somebody else, they have a different effect. So trying to make something which pleases the most amount of people is the goal, because that's the kind of thing it is. It's a non-fiction piece on Kumbh Mela. So you want majority of people to see, not a niche audience. So you have to go through a lot of amount of editing and re-editing to get it right. And yeah, you can't fix it in post. If you think, kar lenge baad mein, not happening. If you've not thought of it in pre-production, you're not getting it in post. There's no way you can fix anything in post in VR. You have to think it and you have to execute it just as you have planned. That's the key thing here for post. So just show you. So this is basically a dual lens camera. There are multiple types of cameras. You've got dual lenses, you've got a single nodal rig. So that's basically one camera, and you keep capturing it separately, but it's not good for motion picture. It's good for taking pictures in 360. Then you have multi-lens cameras, which are Obsidian and so forth. And then you have custom rigs. That you can go all out, depending on your budget. You can have 6 or 12 red cameras capturing in 6K with depth or whatever you want to do. But that's a whole different task. And so this is basically what you have, each individual lens, and then you stitch it together is the equirectangular image that you get. You have to do that with 6 of them for everything that you've shot, even though you have not seen it yet. Also, there is no live preview, so you have to do retakes just to make sure you have enough of backup in case your performance is not good. Now this is ceiling replacement. If you're shooting in a studio, this is basically every shot. There is no way to hide lights, so you light it from the top, and you give enough justification for the lighting, but you still have to get the ceiling right. If you're in the open, there are different kinds of challenges where you might want to light it, but then you have to hide it in a way, or try to use natural lighting, make it in frame. And this is the tripod cleanup. Again, every shot. Doesn't matter where, but you have to get this right, you have to remove it, and you have to plan it properly. You can't place it at a where, if you go to a beach, you can't just place the camera anywhere. You need to know what the ground is, so you get the plate right. Otherwise, you'll have, water is difficult to just clean up because it's a moving thing. So you want to place it properly, you don't want to just place it at random. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to remove it properly. This is basic green screen, right? Now, all of this is the same shot. It's just cut out in cube map for us to do it easily. We cut out in 6 frames, 6 parts. And then we can do each part individually. Then we bring it back together, we stitch it again, and then we have the video. So, yeah. This, I can't stress enough on this. It's very tricky to get it right. Now, obviously, you have the same people in terms of director, producer, writer, and all that. The headings don't really change. What changes is the kind of job role they have. So, a cinemat is not really concerned with, say, movement, because you see everything anyway. There's not much that you can do because really the movement is controlled by the viewer. He or she will decide when to see, what side to see. So your cinemat really has to understand lighting so well that it feels natural wherever you are in that space. It should feel authentic. It should not feel forced as it is lit. So that is a job role which evolves in a very different way. Also, your cinemat needs to be good at managing data. He or she just can't be, I've shot it, now you handle. They need to understand because they've shot 6 different lenses, which is going to be stitched together. Where are the stitch lines? Can you have things over there? Can you not? So again, all of these people have to work in tandem. If one of them decides not to be part of it at pre-production, you need to change them. Everybody over here is a content creator. None of them are below anybody. There's no hierarchy in that way. Everybody has the equal say. And if you don't understand each of the problems as a producer, you are not going to get it right. The role of the producer also changes in the sense they become the fulcrum of communication. They are not really dictators anymore. Okay, aise hoga. No. You have to understand that what is happening with each of these teams, what do they require to get it right, and how well can you communicate within the team so that they understand each other's problems. You can't have your director say, "Mere ko ye chahiye," I just want it. You can't do that. They have to understand what is possible. Similarly, all of these guys, your VFX supervisor becomes pretty important because every shot is a VFX shot. You also want them to be there because sometimes, since there is no live preview, nobody, even the director, cannot see the performance because you have to hide. You can't just be in the frame. But sometimes you want them there, so you have to plan it beforehand. Where can the director stand and observe so that we can replace him out in the post? We take a clean plate and he or she can't move from that place, but we replace that particular lens ka data and you're sorted. But again, you have to plan that out. So these basically are key things that one should remember. And your engineer-in-chief, I can't stress enough, they have to really be on par, because they have to understand and manage throughout the journey of the film. Each individual shot, each stitch shot, each replaced shot, each VFX shot, they need to have a solid grip on all the data you're generating. So hire as many as you can and pay them well.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that is, any questions about things so far? And I'm browsing through because we have short time, but anything that you want to know about in particular, just let me know. And I think this brings us to publishing and distribution. So Facebook and YouTube. Now these are the platforms where you'll find the masses, because it's free. And the headsets you use to get it right, well, there are more if you're taking pictures. So yeah. So Facebook and YouTube offers you masses. That's where a particular kind of, so again, these basically stores or platforms is a good estimate to understand what kind of audience you're going to get. So you have to understand when you're targeting, or you have to lock down your audience. You have to target your audience. Who are you making this experience for? What platform will they have access to? And how well can you make it for them to watch it again and again? One good thing about VR is it has great rewatching capability. If you have, we make one film with 2 characters, first time you see, you try to focus on just one of them. That's their journey. The second time you see it, you focus on the second character and see how that goes about. So every time you see, you have a really good scope of telling the same story, essentially, but with a different perspective. So you need to understand what you're putting it on. Is it interactive? Is it not? If it is interactive, ideally you'll be putting it on the Oculus Store or the Steam or the PlayStation VR, right? So, like I said, these headsets are also expensive, which is a good indicator as to what audience you're getting, what things they're already used to, and how well can you position your product or your film or your game, whatever you're trying to create, in that market. Now, custom players are fun to do, but you need coders, guys. You like software makers, you need them. They need to get it right. You have to work with them. Like he mentioned, ClearVR is one of them. It's a custom player. You can look into it. You can see how that helps. It's very different, but it solves a lot of problems as well. So these are possibilities. You can make your own players if you feel like. And this is a good example of not making films, right? This is basically the Audi. They're trying to sell the new Audi. You go into a room, put the headset on, and you have the first-hand experience of the car. You can be sitting anywhere, and people will be selling you things. So that's a good possibility. The other good thing, not related to making, again, so these are things when you're making your experiences. But VR is useful for other things as well. It's not just filmmaking, it's not just cinematic in that way. It helps you tell and sell cinematically also. So it's a good tool to do recce on. You don't need 20 people to go out at a location for a month. You can just send 3 people with a VR camera, go shoot everything in VR. They come back, you send it to all your people, you send it to the cinemat, and all your 20 people, they can see it at their home, around say, and decide this works, this doesn't work. Shortlist it, and then go for a 1-week trip, and just come back with all the data that you need. So these tools are useful not just to make things in VR, but to help you in your everyday life. There are also cases where this has been used to treat traumatic patients, people who have gone through, burn victims, and people who've gone through some sort of PTSD. VR experiences have helped them to get used to the idea that it's going to be okay. People have phobias, so this has been good for them. Well, it's been funny for me because I get to see them get scared by cockroaches. But if you do it slowly, first time you go in, you do a 2-minuter, then you do a 5-minuter, you do a 10-minuter, and next thing you know, you see a cockroach in real life, and you're okay with it. You're not really scared because you've been used to it now in a safe environment. So these things are something that you should keep in mind, because each of these things help. VR here, VR as a technology is here to entertain, but also be helpful. If you use it wisely, it can be a great tool to make an impact and make you a bunch of money along the way. So you can keep things. Oh yeah, location based, right? So one thing, was it Audi, CC? Holo Ride? So basically Disney and Audi did a collaboration where they put headsets in a car and you go around, you take a cab, right? And as you go through it, you have a VR experience about some apocalyptic thing happening. And before the ride ends, you've reached your place. So it's been an entertaining ride. You're stuck in for 2 hours, but you had fun along the way. So again, it's location based, but the location is moving. So you don't have to be, constrained by regular thinking here. You can decide how to push the envelope and how best to fill in the gap that all these problems are being created over time. So yeah, I guess that brings us to IKEA. IKEA has been doing well with selling furniture with the app. You put it on, you see exactly how the new furniture might look in your own home. So you can figure out how you can do things with this. And this brings us to Health Hazard. So Guardian system is basically what all these headsets have. This lets you build a virtual boundary, which the headset is able to comprehend and sense. So if you happen to cross that boundary, it will show up a grid, helping you understand that this is not the area you should be in, and you step back in. So this has been helpful to understand in a space that might be constrained and not bump into other people or say furniture, or break your hand or something. Motion sickness, we've talked about that. It can induce, especially for first timers, it can induce a sense of vertigo or motion sickness if they have. Loss of depth perception. Now, if you made an experience about a robot who is 7 feet or 10 feet tall, you saw it for about 20 minutes. Great, you had fun. The minute you take it out, you are 6 feet again or 5 feet again. That takes time to understand. You have that loss of perception as to, I was that tall, now I'm not. You lose balance. So if you're creating experiences, you need to understand all these things so that you can plan not to induce these things in your own audience, to make it comfortable for them, not to push it out so much that they don't want to put the headset back on. So these things are something you should consider while you're making these things. And so this is now outdated because most of the phones have blue light filter, but which don't. 15 minutes is max that you should use your phone with. But obviously that's now not applicable if you have blue light filters on your phone. However, I would still advise you to get a standalone headset anyway, because that's where the good resolution is, that's where the good experiences are. So yeah, this is basically it. It's quite short because well, thank you. Any questions, any queries? Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any full feature film on VR ever published or?
You mean feature length, like 90 minutes, 120 minutes that way?
Yeah.
So
With VR experience. Theater. It's captive individual viewing. Why would it be in a theater?
So
People sitting in a group. It's not community viewing.
on that note, however,
Is it a full feature available somewhere?
So there are no feature films there, but there are longer experiences which help you go beyond 90 minutes. And I think, was it China who was working on that?
The dome.
Yeah.
Can I have this? I like a touch.
Do you want to take this?
Can I just have this on? Check. Mic on. Lights on.
Yeah. So when I said you have to approach it as a different platform, this is what I meant, right? Would you ask for little things that is there on Netflix? Would you ask that to be shown in a theater with lots of people? Why? Because it's a different platform. VR is a different platform. So the problem with VR has been that you have produced for another platform and tried to shove it onto this. That is what makes it unnatural. So VR content is not community viewing. It is individual viewing. It is captive individual viewing. So you have to treat it accordingly, right? So if you want people to have a community experience in immersive, you can. There is social VR, right? There is live sports experiences that you can do along with social VR. So PlayStation and Sky have put together a way where you can sit and watch a football game, an EPL game with your friend. But you don't see your friend, you see his avatar in PSVR, in PlayStation. And so you have the owner's box experience. You're sitting in the owner's box, you're watching the game, and it's got like ads and stuff at the back, which pays for all this. And you're sitting on a seat, which is like a sofa. Next to you, your friend is sitting. Also in the owner's box, you see his avatar, he sees your avatar, and you're watching the game. And just like in the owner's box, where from the owner's box you can't zoom, no? Your eyes don't zoom. So TV hota hai. Similarly, there is a frame where the broadcast feed is coming in, where you can see. Now the benefit of this is, because it's 360 space, because it's VR, it's CG content, they also created like a frame on the side where you have a rolling Twitter feed, and on this side where you have player stats. Using the PlayStation controls, you can choose the player, see player stats while the match is happening. You can see statistics, you can see the live scores, you can see kaun kidhar se kya, all the graphics, all that fancy stuff, right? So that's how you treat sports broadcasting in VR. You don't shoot it like you would shoot for television and then shove it onto the VR platform, right? So having a full-length feature film in VR makes no sense. That's not the point. The point is for people to have a captive individual immersive experience, right? So it'll take some time. It's a lot of these things you have to think of it, and I give this analogy a lot, right? Your goal is you want to make a smart car, right? All the auto manufacturers of today are trying to make a car smart. What Google and Apple and Tesla are doing is they're trying to build a safe computer on wheels. So it's the difference it's the difference in approach. So you have to start thinking like that. You have to think, mera outcome kya hai? Stop. You don't need to draw lines from what is existing to VR. You have to create this world completely on its own. Some basic concepts you can take from filmmaking, which are actually not from filmmaking. They're actually from the Natya Shastra. They're born concepts on narratology, concepts on ras, concepts on bhav, concepts on all those other things, right? Which you take from there and you apply it into this world. But it's not. You have to approach it very, very differently. Okay. So I'd like to cool. I want to hand over to Yang. So Yang is a writer and director in the VR lab, and he's quite quiet usually, so it's interesting. This is the longest he's going to speak.
I'm not a public speaker.
A very quick question.
Yes.
Is it possible to say how much typically it costs to make 1 minute of VR?
So depends. It's very difficult to say. I mean, if you want to make 1 minute of me talking, just put the camera there and shoot, right? So it will cost you nothing. You can get a decent VR camera, a prosumer camera for like $400. Stick it on there on a tripod. You've got a VR video of what's happening in this room. It will cost you literally nothing to produce it. But if you want to make a complex, whatever, action thriller with car chases and other things, then yeah, it'll cost you some money. So it's very difficult to say. So there isn't really, like I said, remember that box I showed you about production complexity? That's the one to look at, right? So that will determine how expensive content gets.
Sorry, we'll keep the questions at the end.
Yeah. So just introduction. I'm Zimik. I write and direct for the lab. Today I'm going to be talking a bit about how do you come up with an idea for VR, and then how that term itself is kind of misleading. So getting right into it. The question I get asked most is, what's a good idea for VR? Sir, VR mein kya acha lagega? And when I look at VR as a new medium, it's important to understand that ideas never change. Whether you're writing a film, a poem, a song, the ideas are never changing. It's the medium that changes the way that you're going to approach the idea. And it has to adapt to this medium. So ultimately, it doesn't come down to what the idea is. It's about what the experience is. And that experience can be three things. It can be thematic, which means it's something that you can intellectually be stimulated by, or it can be a spectacle. It's something that inspires a sense of awe in you just by looking at it, by the epicness or the size of it. Or it can be something visceral, where you're trying to give audiences a close to physical emotion just through audio and visuals alone. So in order to understand that, first we have to discuss what is so unique about VR when it comes to creating it, when it comes to consuming it. This is where you gotta love producers. CC stole Immersion and then Aditya stole empathy. But I'm gonna go through them quickly anyways, because like he was saying, when you're reading a book, visually what do you see? You see pieces of black symbols on a piece of paper, and with that you are transported into another space, into another world, into another story with different characters that come alive without doing anything but just transforming those symbols into an image in your mind. That's what we can call a emotional immersion, where you're involved with the story, when you're involved with people and the space. What VR offers now is called technical immersion. Literally, you are technically immersed in the space, because when you put the headset on, that's all you can see. When you put the headphones on, that's all you can hear. So you are in control of an audience's sight and sound. These are the two main primary sources of input that we have. And it's not just an opportunity for a filmmaker, it's also now a responsibility as a filmmaker. And another thing that it does, and this is important in a convoluted way, but it actually turns passive empathy into a sensorial experience. And what I mean by that is, when Aditya was talking about a war movie, to give you a simple idea, like Saving Private Ryan, the first scene in that film, you're put into a war film, in a war zone, and the first thing that you're thinking about is Tom Hanks. He's the protagonist, and you empathize and sympathize with him, and you're thinking, oh my god, I hope nothing bad happens to him. Because no matter what you do, you're watching a film. In the back of your mind, you're just sitting in an AC room with everybody else, and you're having fun, and you're worried for him, but you're not actually that involved. You're empathetic, but you're not experiencing the war itself. And what happens with VR is, it's sometimes, if it's done well, that empathy can turn into an experience. And when that happens, you don't care about what happens to Tom Hanks. Your sensory reflex turns inwards, and you're worried about what's happening to you. That can be useful, or it can be very bad for your film. If people stop caring about your protagonist and start worrying about themselves, then they've lost the plot. Then you've lost the connection to the character itself, and the film might fail. Alternatively, if you're making a horror film where the audience is the character, then that's a great way to use VR, where you do the same thing except with horror. And finally, what's cool is finally the audience has the freedom from the director's hold. Sorry. And what I'm primarily referring to is the freedom to look basically wherever you want. And what that means is the way in which a director or a writer or a filmmaker is transferring visual information to the audience changes, because you don't have close-ups. You can't go all Fincher and just have a close-up of one word, of one letter. You know, you can't close up to, like somebody, you can write, a guy walks into the room and notices a gun in his pocket. In VR, how are you going to determine that the audience notices what you've written? So it's about how we are delivering visual information, and that method changes. And the rules of filmmaking have to adapt to VR. Oh, there. All right. And then there are a lot of times your scale and your budget usually are already decided for you, even before you move into a project. So it's important to, like, yeah, we can all be princesses and demand that this is my story and this is how I want to do it and give me the money. But very often that's not what you do. You have a budget and you have to stick to that. And the problem is, in VR there's nowhere to hide. There's nothing to hide. If I have an apartment, I can cover up one wall of my living room, make it look really swanky, and I can pretend like this is, you know, a mansion in South Bombay. But in VR, people are gonna have the opportunity to just turn left, turn right, and there you are. I'm sitting there in my underwear, my laundry's over there on the side, there's a dog in the corner taking a dump. It's all there. You can't just pretend like none of it exists. You can't just fix it in post, as Aditya was talking about. You have to plan for that and you have to budget it. So unfortunately, as much as we like to be artists, we also have to be producers. Yuck. Sorry. Another thing to consider is the duration and the output of the film. Aditya's already spoken about what different outputs mean and what different durations can have an effect on audiences. So, I mean, let's not get too much into that. But what this means also, personally as a writer, it means don't waste your audience's time, because they don't have much of it and you don't either. The budget will always limit you and will always tell you to cut. But how much are you going to cut? You know? So it comes down to you as a writer. How are you writing dialogues? Are you writing question? Are you playing a game of question, answer? Or are you really getting down to it and using your tools as a writer to add layers and then just deliver them as quickly as possible and get the idea across? And with this, we get into genres. Sorry. We're talking about basically non-fiction and fiction VR content. When I talk about non-fiction, I mean documentaries, where, just to give you an example, there's this VR experience / documentary. How would you describe it? It's become so absurd now, it's hard to describe. It's a documentarial, experiential film content from 2017 called Tree. You put the headset on, they give you these haptic feedback sensors, there are fans blowing, there are vibrations on the floor, and you're given a backpack that actually shakes, and you start off as a sapling in the ground. It's completely dark, all you can hear is the earth around you, insects crawling and stuff like that. As you start moving your hands, you literally grow from a seed to a sapling. And when you emerge from the ground, you are now part of the world. Like you see the ants crawling around you, the birds coming and pecking at you, the rain coming and falling. And as the sapling grows, you grow into a larger and larger tree until you reach the top of the forest and your perspective changes. And it's this wonderful experience. And then, very predictably, someone comes and zzz, hacks you right down. The idea is not new. Deforestation and the dangers of, preserving our rainforest. The idea is not new. In fact, it's very cliched. But the way that the idea has been approached in VR is what makes it special. So when we're talking about VR documentaries, we need to look at it not in the form of content, but in the way of approach, and how we can use that to really improve the kind of content that we're putting out there. And when it comes to fiction, we're all very familiar with what does a rom-com look like? What does an action film feel like? What does a horror film sound like? These are genre expectations that we just know. We all know what it feels like to be in a Rohit Shetty film, you know? These are the genre expectations. What's fun about films in VR is that a lot of these things don't work. The tools are limited. Because, just to give you an example of an action film, it's so much about editing, so much about building pace through your edit and your cuts. But when you cut in a film, you're cutting between images. When you cut in VR, you're cutting between spaces. And that's the big difference. Then your whole tool, your whole arsenal of tools as a filmmaker gets thrown out the window. You have to readjust them and bring them back. Did I go? No. So, but one thing is good. The writing process almost remains the same. The literal writing process, not the intellectual part of it, but it's basically the same. If any of you have seen a script or written a script, I would say it's pretty much the same, except what happens when you have more than one thing happening in the frame. In an infinite frame that's happening, that's all around you, there can always be more than two things happening at the same time. And traditional scripts ultimately are linear. Action, dialogue, action, dialogue, action, dialogue. Even if you're Nolan, you're writing Memento, it's always action, dialogue, action, dialogue, action, dialogue. Things don't happen at the same time, even if it's happening backwards. So what we have is a very simple process called news. It's the news format, north, east, west, south. So supposing something's happening in front of me and something's happening on the, this is my west, on the west, sorry. Something's happening in front and something's happening on the west. I'll write scene 2, N, and I'll explain what's happening here. Scene 2, W, and I'll explain what's happening right over here. You don't have to use it for every scene because then you're going to end up with a 20-page script for a 5-minute film. But in the important scenes, that the reason you'd use this is timing. So much of film is about timing, whether it's a jump scare, whether it's an action, whether it's a dance choreography, or whether even it's comedy. Timing is everything. And to get that timing right, you have to write it such. So these are the places that we really need to look at that are different from normal filmmaking, where more than one thing can happen at the same time in different areas of the frame. And how do you traverse that as a writer? How do you flow through them is what's very important. So this is just the literal way that we deal with writing for VR. And very often I'll find myself over-explaining all the action. So it's boring, but it makes it very clear to every single person reading the script what's what, who's where, and when's what's happening. Like, you know, the 5 W's or whatever, everything gets answered with every single sentence of action. And that's just the physical part of it. Now the actual writing process is, it's a lot of fun. Mostly because if you've been writing for a while, you can get caught in a rut. And the best thing about VR is that it forces you to revisit all of your tools as a writer. Like, just to give you an example, if I were to try to write a compelling murder revelation sequence, I would be using tools of intercutting, right? I would intercut between this scene and that scene and build up tension. And I would write that into the script. But since every cut is no longer cut between images, it's a cut between locations. You have to understand that whenever you cut in a VR film, it takes the audience like 1 or 2 seconds. It takes even me half a second to readjust myself to the space, right? Like I was here and then I'm there. And just that motion, just that transportation, even if I've watched a lot of content, it takes me like half a second to get used to it. Oh, I'm here. I was looking here. I'm still there, but now I'm looking here. That half a second can ruin the pace of your film. That pacing that you were trying to create through editing has now worked against you. So these tools keep changing, and as audiences mature, maybe, eventually we'll come full circle and get back to French New Wave, and there'll be, people just jump cutting in VR and making everyone throw up willy-nilly. That's fine. Yeah, but when we're coming down to brass tacks and talking about building a curriculum that you're teaching to students, You don't want to do that. You want to get the basics right, and that's what it's all about. Learning how to make VR films is basically just learning how to make films all over again. And another, like I was saying, the way we give information has to change. And unless we create, so it's all about creating points of focus in the scene, like different points of focus that you direct viewers to, where their important information lies, and then they might not see what you want them to see, and that's when the drama fails. So it's all about controlling where audience is looking, how they're looking at them, and how they flow through a scene. How you write the scene and how they react to the scene may be two very different things, and it'll make or break your film. Sorry. Yeah, and no, yeah, I want to talk about editing and writing. Like, a lot of it comes down to, in the writing process itself, you have to be aware of the medium and the way it's consumed. Like, you have to identify how you're moving from, so it's no longer about moving from plot point to plot point, it's about moving from a point of interest to a point of interest, because that's the only thing the audience is actually following. They're not following your plot necessarily, they're following what's interesting to them, and that is where you should be placing your plot, to make sure that they align together. As an example, alright, I'm full of examples. If you have two characters, they're talking to each other, one guy in a prison cell, two people are talking. One guy is a prisoner, the other guy is his lawyer. The prisoner is talking about how he was wrongfully convicted. Yeah, it's a 5-minute heartfelt speech that's all about convincing the lawyer that he's innocent. You can have this scene in a normal film, and you can also do it in VR. The content remains the same. But what is it about shooting that scene just like that in VR? Just put it simply, you're wasting the gift of VR itself. When you take a dialogue scene and you just plonk it in without any thought of what the medium is, you're wasting the opportunity to use it for something more. If you took the same scene, you had the conversation in VR, but this time you understand the medium, you understand how audiences look at dialogues, look at people talking. You know how they look at people talking? They get bored. In 15 seconds flat, people will get bored of looking at someone talking, and they're going to start looking around. If you understand the medium, you can anticipate that. Imagine now he's talking about how he's so innocent and stuff, and the lawyer is listening carefully. But behind him, as a director, with my production designer, I've covered the wall with like sketches of horrific mutilated bodies and decapitated heads that the prisoner might have been drawing. The audience may or may not look. They probably will, because they'll get bored of listening to people talk. And when they turn around, they'll see that, and that adds another layer to what's being said. And that's about using the medium to add layers and add depth and add subtext to an otherwise boring conversation. It's not intellectually boring, but it's visually boring. Yep. So now, when I talk about directing attention, I'll get into that later when I'm talking about directing attention visually. But when I say directing attention in writing, first of all, nobody needs to be told how important dialogues are. But in VR, they have to be used very economically. You can't just have monologue after monologue after monologue with nothing really happening except an emotional connection, because then you're not using the technical aspects of it. One of the easiest ways you can use dialogue to direct attention is, guy looks at you and says, "Hey, who's that behind you?" Audience is going to turn on. That's a very simple, explicit way of doing it. There are better ways and implicit ways of directing attention through dialogue. Imagine it's a dinner scene. You and your wife have come and you've sat down. Your wife is sitting opposite you. Your friend comes and sits down. You have a conversation with your friend. The friend asks me, "So, how's the marriage? Everything's good? Yeah. When's the baby coming?" And I joke and I say, "Hopefully never." He laughs, I laugh. As an audience, what are you looking at next? Who do you look for next? the voice reaction. In a film, we might cut away to a close-up. In a VR film, we anticipate the desire for the audience to turn. They're doing the editing for us. By the dialogue, it's not telling them, look there, but it's implicitly creating a desire for audiences to turn. And what that does is it's now the focal point was a conversation between this, and now it's shifted to the woman. And you can take your scene forward from there. So when I talk about flowing through a scene from point of interest to point of interest and not plot to plot, this is what I mean. You create the desire, you are editing in your writing itself. You're replacing editing through your writing in a weird way. And of course, when you're writing, there are writers who write sound, and then there are writers who do not write sound. It's as simple as that. But if you're working in VR, you have to write for sound. Because when it comes to directing attention, sound is king. Everyone's mentioned that 1, 2, and now 3 times. As a VR writer, you have to know how sound can create rhythm. If you can't create rhythm through editing, you can create it through sound. If you can't, if you're trying to do a jump scare or a punchline, then you can use sound to prepare somebody for a punchline, to prepare somebody for a jump scare. And you have to also understand how physical watching VR is. You're not just expecting someone to sit back and watch the film lying down on a couch, maybe asleep, maybe not asleep. There's a physicality to watching a film in VR, and that physicality determines how you are using sound as well. If you have a jump scare in your film, and you've written it in such a way that clashes with another point of interest, then your audiences will miss the jump scare completely. Like they'll be looking at something else while there's a ghost walking past you in the corridor over there. If you're not carefully choreographing all these movements, audiences will just lose the plot. They won't get scared, and they'll come out of the film like, that was a very sweet movie. The film is called Shaitan Ka Ghar. What did you watch, right?
And this is not, Manje Hue Khiladi have done this. If you saw the VR promo for Stranger Things, they messed up, right? They didn't. So the Stranger Things VR experience is a phone ringing, and you're like, what is happening? Nothing is happening, and you're supposed to turn around at a time when that thing comes and does in your face. Everybody misses that, right? Because they did it so fast, they didn't leave people enough time to turn around. By the time you had turned around, that thing was just standing there. And you're like, what? The phone is ringing. What is happening? Right? So, even they can mess up. Difficult.
And they did. That's my excuse for everything. So Aditya already talked about storyboarding, so I won't go into technical aspects of that. But what I do want to touch upon is, how do you visualize for VR? Very often what we do when how do you visualize anything? It's always in a 2D frame, because that's how we've grown up, and that's actually literally how our vision is anyways. So how do you visualize for VR? It's important to note that a lot of times writers, directors, visual creators, they're always drawing from their own experiences, from their own memories. So one thing that you have to keep in mind is, how do you visualize your own memories? How do you experience your memories? Like, you might remember your favorite bicycle, and in your mind it's like a close-up of the handle, the bell, you've put a bow on the back, you have a wide shot of you riding down, crane shot, this tracking shot, your knees are scraped but you're having fun. None of that will translate into VR. The metaphor that you're trying to explain visually, it may not translate into VR. Just to give it like a very simple example, like I'm having an argument with my girlfriend, we're having a fight. She's yelling at me and I'm looking at this dead plant in the corner of the room and thinking, this is a metaphor for my relationship, I didn't water the plant, mar gaya. Now it's dead. In a film I can do that, cut to close, and just visually I can relate that kind of visual information and create a metaphor and create meaning through that. A plus B equals C. But in VR, you place the camera anywhere in that room. That plant has no significance whatsoever. It doesn't translate into the medium at all. The only way you can't even call attention to it, because it's a plant. It's a dead plant. you can call attention to it by dialogue, but then now the audience is looking at what plan, you know, it's going to flop, and what might have been wonderfully beautiful, erotic, sensual, okay, that's right, in your mind may not translate whatsoever in VR. So think about how you think is what I would say, and it's wonderful exercise because, I mean, I live in Bombay, I'm in traffic all the time. That's all I do. So I want, even in Bangalore.
That's worse.
2 hours, 2.5 hours.
Lovely. I should move to Bangalore. Yes, I won't get into visual, I mean the storyboarding aspect. It's pretty much the same, except this is my drawing, so it's 10 times worse than the example. So you've written a script and you have a great idea and you've pitched it to people and you've done your storyboarding and everyone's pretty much ready to start film making. You, especially, because you're the director, big man, right? What are the aspects? So I'm not going to go into how you direct the entire film. I'm going to go into what is different about directing for VR. And one of the most important things is pretty much working with your actors, because they're very wonderful yet feeble people. Bollywood is obsessed with the close-up. Most people want to become actors so they can see themselves be 60 feet tall on a silver screen, right? Which may not come true. But when it comes to acting for VR, there has to be an adaptation to the medium. One of these adaptations is your acting style itself. And how are you emoting through your face or your body, and when do you use what? We all know what it means to, fully emote with your body because we all have seen theater and stuff like that. In that case, it's similar to VR because the actor's body is always in full view, no matter where he's standing, unless he's being obstructed by an object or a furniture or something like that. You will always see him head to toe. And that means that he has to act with his entire body. So you need to sit down with your actors and explain to them, not explain, but decide amongst yourself, like, how do your shoulders look when you're tense? How do your feet move when you're happy? How do your hands look when you're sad? That kind of physicality really comes through in VR because your face really doesn't. That's a technical issue that we have. Acting according to how far you are from the camera. Literally, if you go further than 7 or 8 feet from the camera, the audience can no longer see them. They don't become invisible, but the pixels, then the resolution becomes so bad that you may not necessarily see very minute and detailed facial expressions. And also what happens, the further they go away from the camera, the smaller volume they hold in the context of the entire frame, and therefore less visually important they become, and more easily your audience can be distracted by something else and not connect with them. So keeping your audience's attention by working with your actors to bring out the physicality of an emotion is a wonderful technique that we use all the time. And there's something in it for actors also, like honestly. When it comes to VR, like I told you, you can't cheat anything. When you're building a set, you're building all 4 walls, right? And the beautiful part about that is and there's no frame. So an actor is never limited by the frame. He can never walk out of frame, and he can never walk out of a set. So he has complete freedom to add layers and value to the film through movement, through choreography, and just by having the fact that no one's staring at him. There aren't 20 assistants staring right into his face when I say action, like we do in Bollywood. Everybody leaves the set, then we roll, and you can't see anything. It's just the actor, and it's so much easier for them to get into character that they perform a lot better. And when it comes to making the film, when you've pretty much set to roll, and then as a director you walk on the set, it's very important to understand that however talented your previous guy might be, he's not that talented to replicate real life, to actually go on your set and then to flow through your set and understand how audiences will watch it. It's as simple as just standing in the middle of the room and going like this and thinking, I'm the audience, where would I look? Where do I look and where do I end up looking, no matter where I place the camera? That becomes a focal point, and I can choreograph actors and props and actions around that space where the eye is naturally drawn to. I'll talk more about that when we talk about design flow. And camera placement, like the first question that always pops into your mind that you can never answer ever is, what's the first shot going to be? Where do you place the camera for the first shot? Camera placement in VR is such a tricky thing because think about it this way: if I show it's a room, if I shoot this room from eye level, no scene, no drama, no plot, no nothing. I just take the shot and I show it to you. If I take it from eye level, the first emotion that you get is, oh, okay, I'm normal, eye level, I feel normal, I'm a person, and I'm just looking at this. Let's see what's going on. I take that camera, I take it 2 feet higher, or maybe 3 feet higher. Now the camera's 9 feet high. Same shot, put the headset on. Now the audience thinks, oh, what, I'm really tall. What, am I a giant? Am I a security camera? Am I a ghost? The way I'm seeing the film changes. Take the camera, put it 3 feet lower, put it 3 feet high. Put the headset on, suddenly you're like, oh, am I a midget? Am I an animal? Am I a dog? And it also changes the kind of information you're getting. If I put the camera 2 feet low, maybe I'll see something under the table that you couldn't see from eye level. The kind of information that you can deliver to an audience changes just by your camera placement. And it changes how you experience it emotionally as well. Take this room. Who's the safest person in this room? It's me. You know why? Because I'm standing against the wall and I can see the door. Right? That's the thing, right? People, you want to face the door because danger might come from there. You want to face a wall because that's secure. If I place the camera here, I can get that same sensation. But if I'm making a horror film, how do I make someone feel vulnerable? You expose them from every side. That will tell you how you're going to place your camera movement. I mean, how you're going to place your camera. Just these little things, how you want the experience to go, will inform how the camera should be moving, static, tall, low, inside, outside. Doesn't matter. And then we get into the idea of, as a director, you're no longer just directing a frame. You're no longer just directing images. You're directing attention. When we're talking about flowing through points of interest and not just plot, this is the director's bread and butter in VR. So I want to get into. We have time. Yeah. I want to get into a bit of what it means to direct attention in VR. One of the most important visual aspects of directing attention is design flow in space. I want to change. It's off. I just want to show something else, but turn out of balance.
What do you want me to do?
I just want to see that picture on this screen. I think you just drag it. When we talk about the visual language, we're talking about, when I'm talking about design flow, I'll just try to explain it to you in 3 different examples with architecture, painting, and websites. As simple as that. Oh, just full screen. Down.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, when you're talking about a church, we've all seen churches, we've all been inside churches. What does it feel like when you first walk into a church? The first thing that hits you if you're walking in normally is these rows that are, lined up and all leading straight down the aisle. That aisle is converging to one certain point. If your eye goes horizontally across the benches, they meet these pillars. The pillars go up and up and up and up, and until they arch on the top, and every single arch makes a line that leads straight down once again to the center. It's all about these converging lines that force you almost, no matter where you look, no matter what you're doing, all of it is centered to one point, which is the pulpit where the cross is situated. This is because as a space, the church is designed, I mean, a lot of religious buildings are designed with only one idea and one focus in mind, to bring out that spirituality and to kind of overpower your your visual sense into just one idea, faith. This is how, and then the next picture, that's an example of architecture. The same goes for all great artists. When they're painting, this is the Musicians by Caravaggio. When you first look at the painting, naturally the first thing we look at are people's eyes, and when they're looking at you. Here what's interesting is the two people looking at you. So usually when you would look at a painting and you see one person looking at you, you stare into those eyes and that's about it. But when you paint two people looking at you, you break the inertia and you force the viewer to switch. That first movement, and you're in his control. You're looking at the central guy, you're looking at his eyes, then you notice the other guy on his left. Then you notice the emotion. The emotion, like the eyes are half shut, the lips are half parted, gives off a sense of sensuality and sexuality in the painting itself. That leads you to the third guy on the right. And his arm, look at the way his arm is the brightest part of the painting actually. And it leads you straight down and to your left, to his thighs. And you can actually, if you are following that kind of story that Caravaggio's painting, you can see his thighs kind of shoved between the guy's crotch, actually, And all of that is done just to tell you a story of these boys, and it's actually, okay, enough of that. It's too stimulating. No, there's no third thing. The third thing is websites. And for that, I don't need to show you a photograph. Just think of Facebook. When you open up your Facebook page, it's designed as an infinite scroll because it's designed to make you just stay on the website as long as possible. So your eyes never really move. They just stick to the center of the frame and the website moves relative to you. That's the way the whole website is designed, and that's what I mean when I talk about design in space. It's not necessary that you're going to have the budget to build churches and cathedrals every film you make, but it's important to recognize in a space what the focal point is, where your eyes are being led to. Once you recognize that in a space, then you can design action and choreography around that space, because you understood that subconsciously people will end up looking there. And here I'm talking about movement in terms of character choreography. Like, this is very simple. How you direct attention through movement will decide who the audience is paying attention to at any given point of the frame. And that means whether it's your primary character, your hero, or the background dancer. How you have designed and choreographed their movement will define who's looking at what when. So it's important to understand that whoever's closest to the camera is not always the most important person in the frame. Whoever's grabbing the audience attention is. So one thing that isn't used in normal traditional filmmaking is the use of peripheral vision. Because as human beings, our evolutionary trait is that we are most perceptive to movement in our peripheral vision. That's how we detect predators and danger and autos, right? So this isn't used in normal filmmaking because we don't have to. But this is what we can use in VR. The protagonist is not always the most important visual aspect of the frame. A little movement on the corner of your eyes will always pull you there. And that's how you can direct attention from your protagonist to, when I mean pull attention away from characters, I usually mean pulling attention away from the hot chick, and for once, God, please look at this other character. He is also important. He is part of the film, And then sound design. So I've talked a lot about sound design, but one thing to keep in mind about sound is that it will form, no matter how you are editing your film, it will always form the basis and the context for reality of the viewer. What that means is you're creating a sound universe, you're creating every single aspect that makes a space real, and once it's real, you can play with it. Only once it's real can you start playing with the space. Otherwise, we are so perceptive to mistakes in sound, whether it's in film or in real life, that unless it feels real, nothing feels real. And sorry. Yeah, and I would actually combine these two, like restricting vision and color. Restricting vision, and not, when I say creating frames within frames, I don't necessarily mean in the way that we're taught in film school, like you have the guy in a window or standing against a door necessarily, but understanding shapes and how things can lead a night, and how do I explain this? I should know how to explain this actually. But the idea is color and shapes and I forgot. Creating frame within color. Wait. Yeah, sorry, my mistake. I'm so sorry. When I talk about restricting vision, I'm talking about when are you showing what in terms of, you know what, I've totally forgotten. Sorry. Yeah, but I do want to talk about color. Color is important. Maybe frame within, I might edit that out in the next one. But when I talk about color, color is intrinsically something that we understand very well. That's why traffic lights are red. That's why green is go, stop is red. These kind of colors have meaning, and they can be used in VR to direct attention. If any of you have played video games, have you played video games? Anyone? Their color has a lot of meaning because they tell you where you are in your journey. You know, blue means magic, red means fire, green means good, green means you're going to the place that you want to be. These kind of color theories you can use in VR as well, and pull attention away from certain spaces to another space, make audiences feel like they're achieving something, like they're getting closer to the end of the film or this presentation. And these are all just different ways that you can draw attention, direct attention in VR. This is also like just a starter kit. There's so much that goes into making a film and the physicality of actually being in a VR set. Do we have time for a case study? Sure, okay. I was just going to do my mother's class. It might not be 5 minutes.
Make it 5.
Alright, so I'm just going to run through this real quickly. Just to give you an example of one of the films that we tried making. We did make it. We tried making well, at least. We made this, it's a horror drama film about this woman who comes home from work one day and she's having a conversation with her dad on the phone, and she's being followed around her 1 BHK in Bombay by a ghost. What I wanted to do here was create 2 parallel narratives, one visual and one oral. So the audience can listen to the conversation throughout the film and get one story, and watch the ghost on the other end and get another story. I did this because I wanted to see where audiences would look, how you can combine the complete visual of one. Because if you have a woman and a ghost in the same room, where are you going to look? Most people are going to look at the ghost, right? So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a kind of parallel narrative, but not between stories, but between sound and visual. So what we didn't do was we didn't use a lot of horror tropes like jump scares and stuff like that. I wanted to build a very slow, burning kind of tense scene, because visually there's a ghost in your apartment, but orally they're just talking about life. The father and the daughter are just talking about life and her future. So this case study is about how we design the space, because we built the 1 BHK, and this is the first design that we had. As you can see, you enter on the right side, and I wanted to place the kitchen on the left the bedroom on the left and the kitchen on the right. And I was hoping that audiences would choose. You know, you either look this way and get the ghost, or you look that way, and the woman be on the other side of the room, on the other side of the house. So I wanted to make audiences make a choice. So we built a mock-up of this set. We did a rehearsal. We shot it over there, and do you know what ended up happening? When I showed it to people, they didn't look here or there. They chose to stare at the middle of the wall and then look at the story from one eye each. Like, we wanted to give them a choice, and they chose Z. Like, I couldn't have predicted this as a writer. Like, is it not interesting enough for you? What more do you want? There's a ghost and this half-naked woman. What do you want? And they're looking at this wall, and that's when I realized the set has failed. So we had to go back, rebuild the set, and this time we changed it to this. And here you can see that the kitchen and the bedroom are much more separated. So you can't see both at the same time. But even then, you know from the deepest pit of your heart that people will just look at this part of the room and try to look kone kone, chupe chupe. They'll be trying to get both stories, because like CC was talking about FOMO, the fear of missing out of either of those stories was too great for most people. So what we do as filmmakers is we adapt. You cannot go around shaking audiences like, this is how you're supposed to watch my film. They're going to watch it the way that comes naturally to them, and it's up to us to adapt to that. So we can't have the sit on a high horse and pretend like they don't understand my art. Right? That's what half of Goa does this week. But in this case, I mean, it's such a natural reaction that, and you can't explain it to audiences. You can't have a 5-minute or a 1.5 hour intro to VR before every film. So here what we did was, after we understood what audience laziness looks like, we were able to anticipate that. So when I built this next set, I was able to anticipate that people will end up looking here. That's the focal point of this space. So what we did was, we put a lot of props and furniture here that was plot specific. Like the conversation that the daughter and the father have is about their mother, and how growing up she had a very estranged relationship with her mother, and blah blah blah. Big surprise, the ghost is the mother. But this whole wall we covered up with paintings of her from her childhood with her mother and stuff like that, so that even if audiences do end up being lazy and looking at the wall, at least it'll add a layer to the plot that they're hearing orally and maybe visually looking at the ghost in the kitchen. So that's how we can overcome certain flaws and certain problems that are just human problems and human flaws. And this is a nice view of, this is the actual space. This is a 360 shot of it. You can see me in the corner looking all depressed. See, so this is the space that I was talking about. Here's the bedroom, here's the kitchen, and this is the space that people would ultimately end up looking at. So instead of placing something pointless like a shelf of books or a television or a Ganeshka statue or something like, not useless, but unimportant to the plot, you can anticipate where people will look and then use that to your advantage. So that's one of the case studies that we're doing. So that ends my presentation, but I would love to have questions, because
I think let's do about 5 minutes of questions before they throw us out.
So yeah, 5 minutes. Come sit.
Hi. Okay.
Yeah.
So my question is 2 questions. One is, does the camera move ever as of now yet?
Yes. Yes. So we actually did a test where in a relatively enclosed space there was a story where the protagonist was moving, or actually the antagonist was moving between coffee tables in a coffee shop and then heading out to the door. So we did one take where we just kept the camera in the middle of the room and one take we did where the camera moves along one axis along with the person, and we realized that the second take actually added much more value, because like he was saying, the point of interest was maintained, right? And we had thrown in the typical trope. So there was a woman sitting here, there was something else happening here, there was something else happening there. And the idea was we wanted people to follow the action, the point of interest. So we realized that when you move the camera, it was easier to maintain point of interest. Now that said, you should try and do 3-DOF movement, right? So you shouldn't do things like don't pan, because you can't pan because there is no frame. But still, don't just swing the frame around in all of a sudden. Don't cut to, say, you're looking here, and don't cut to the same scene where you're looking there, because it gets disorienting, right? Don't mess with the horizon, and don't do roll. So suddenly, if you're at this height and looking straight, don't suddenly cut to yourself at the same height or at a higher height looking down, because that messes. So those camera movements, if you avoid, camera movements is absolutely fine. Well, Kumbh, we've done lots of camera movements. We've done handheld camera movements, we put cameras on horses, we've done everything.
And my second question is related to like writing that he was speaking about. In a sense, I think the viewer is always a fly on the wall in every experience, right? No, not really.
Not necessarily. So, I mean, like I said, in the beginning, it's how is the experience? What is the experience going to be like? Is it going to be something that's intellectually stimulating, like, or is it something that's visceral? Like, is it? In that case, that would change the way that you treat the audience. Like in a horror film, you want to be visceral, so it would be great if you have the audience as the character and make them undergo that kind of horrific experience. If you're
just a thing to that, one thing that all viewers feel when they put the headset on is, who am I? That is the first question that we have to answer.
That's the first thing you want to answer.
So that's how we decide in pre-production who is the observer.
Now,
who are you?
there are also films that have been made where the entire film is spent arriving at that answer, and that journey is actually the fun. So there's a film called Ashes to Ashes, it's available on YouTube, where the viewer is, should I tell you or do you want to see it? If I tell you, then you lose the whole point. Where you're an urn containing ashes of somebody who died, and you find that out right at the end. Well, not towards the end, but midway through the film. So there the camera is low, the people who are talking about somebody who died and their thing, and then you're like, "Kya ye ho kya raha hai?" And then halfway through you realize that, you know what, that's me. I am the urn of ashes, right? It's called Ashes to Ashes, and it's, it has layers. It talks about in relationships, it talks about generational relationships, master of the house and kids and those kind of things. So it's a pretty interesting film. You can, of course you can. See, the simplest way to do it is try and make the camera, I mean, abnormal is a harsh word to use, but at an abnormal location within the world, right? So like Yang said, if you just push up the camera 2 feet higher, automatically you get the expression that someone is looking down on the scene. So it automatically will create a third person impression, right? But again, these are things that haven't been, we're still writing the rules, right? So like I give an analogy, we are right now learning how to ride a bike while the bike is still being put together. Right? In the middle of the riding the bike, somebody is taking one engine out, putting another one wheel is being changed. So we are in that process right now, which is why you need a lab for this. Otherwise then you'll have hundreds of people producing commercial content, right? So a lot of the concepts that he spoke about, to not make writing and direction plot point heavy but point of interest heavy, or all those, these are all things that aren't, they're not rules of filmmaking yet. in VR, but they will be, right, going forward.
How does zoom work in VR?
Sorry, zoom.
Zoom in, zoom out.
So you cannot zoom in VR. You can move the camera closer. You can only move the camera closer, but you cannot zoom in VR. Because if you're zooming in, you're zooming out, right, at the back end. Because, like I said, it's not, how should I tell you?
It's not cinema.
Tennis. Take the tennis and table tennis experience. You can play table tennis standing right next to the table, and you can play table tennis standing 10 feet away from the table. You can't do that with tennis. You have to be inside the court all the time, right? So think of that as zoom. Think of the camera that way. When you're standing right next to the table, you're fully zoomed in. Super close up. Aankhein dikh rahi hai. Amrish Puri ki. Right? Khoon se laal. But when you're like far away, you're seeing 30 backup dancers dancing in a Mithun film. So that's the way to look at it. Yeah, you had a...
What is the editing workflow like, and can we use cuts if we use how to?
Workflow, there is no difference. Adobe Premiere has 360 support, FCP has 360 support, I think Avid also has, nahi to aa jayega. It's not that. Workflow is no, but what you need to do is you need to start getting used to working in ERP, equirectangular plane format. So you saw the last image that he showed you of the house. So it's an ERP, it's an equirectangular plane. So it's like a globe versus a map. Atlas mein hum map dekhte hain na? So it's essentially a globe that's stretched out. So the tops and the bottoms are extremely stretched out, and the middle is appropriate. So you need to get used to seeing something in equirectangular and imagining what is going to look like in immersive. But you'll get used to that. It doesn't take that long, right? If you have good visualization skills, you can. But editing is the same. Editing cut points are very, very, very different. Why you're editing, like Yang said, you're not just editing. Why don't you take it?
Yeah, I think film buffs will love VR because you're no longer designing shots based on the cut. You're kind of going the Tarkovsky way and building time pressure. You have longer takes, and you're trying to build rhythm within the shot because you don't have the freedom to cut as often. So that's something that we can really look at. How are we designing shots? How are we creating rhythm? Which, we're not editing, we're not cutting, and we are just using other elements. Like, this is where the artsy people can come with the normal people and just have a lot of fun.
So My Mother's Glass was an 8.5 minute single take. But the next film we made called The Prey, which we've carried to show if anybody wants, that's a 5-minute film with 15 cuts. 15 cuts. Right? So
Also audio, spatial audio also you do in Premiere only? Or?
no. So you need Pro Tools is the base, and you get plugins. So there's the easiest one to get is Audio Ease, right? It's not very expensive. Where you can do spatial audio and then binauralize it. And then you can, or if you want to move on, then there's Dear VR. So Dear VR is another German company which Sennheiser has acquired. That's also, it sits on top of Pro Tools, allows you to do spatial audio. That also allows you to do spatial audio in headset. So you don't have to keep taking the headset out every time because it's a pain, right? And using the Oculus controllers. So that's there. But I mean, audio, honestly, don't mean to insult sound engineers or whatever, but the evolution between cinema immersive audio and spatial audio for VR is the least as compared to the other areas. So the evolution of shooting for film versus shooting for VR, writing for film, writing for VR, directing for film, directing for VR is much more longer, wider and bigger than sound, because over the past 20 years we've already tried to make sound more and more immersive. We've tried to do that, right? Now instead of coming from 52 speakers, it's coming from 2 speakers. That's basically the major difference, right? And you are using sound as a way to direct attention because it's a frameless environment, and to create tension and to hold the story together and add it as a narrative thread. So actually when you're writing, your sound guy should be sitting next to you. he or she should be writing with you, because they also have to write sound. ये सेकंड में क्या हो रहा है? It's not just visual. पहले visual है, बाद में आप sound डालोगे. ऐसे नहीं होता. आपको sound लिखना पड़ेगा. Because sound may be necessary at that 32 seconds. This sound needs to come in because this needs to happen at 35 seconds, and you can't have the people miss it. And you can't have a pause in between while people figure out, where am I supposed to look? Because then that just kills the pace. Right? So
is the sound far better, or how is it so much enhancing than sync sound we use? So we had this dubbing facility, we came out in cinema, in movies. So we had this dubbing facility, we got sick about it, and then we use sync sound. Now, as I understand now, as you go through the whole section, whatever. Now it says that, like, you know, the sound itself becomes predominant, and how is it? Is it going to be a sync sound?
yeah, it's only sync. It's very. I mean, you can dub, but it's not ideal.
That's right.
It's not ideal, but you can dub. We've dubbed. We've done films where we've dubbed.
Also, the thing is that you have to capture sound. How you use it later on is a different thing. So you can use dubbing, you can use sync sound, you can use maybe 50 years down the line you have some other way of recording sound. It doesn't matter how you record the data, as long as you capture everything crystal clear, then you can mess with it.
But since you mentioned about sound, see, diegetic sound and non-diegetic sound is treated very differently. In cinema, on the big screen, because you have a framed environment, right, you can see everything that's happening. So if you don't see a cow, but you hear the mooing of a cow, then you know that, you know, it's a voiceover, right? Or if you don't see any women on the screen and there's a voice of a woman, you automatically know it's a VO. In VR that doesn't happen because there is no frame. So if you want something to be VO, you have to very, very intently treat it and color it as a VO so that people know that this is voiceover and they don't keep looking around saying "Kaun lady baat kar rahi hai?" Because you won't know, right? What is how do you distinguish diegetic sound from non-diegetic sound? You will keep looking for the visuals. So the idea is to, as the film is starting or as something is starting and there's black screen or whatever, start the sound even before the visuals start. So automatically you know that acha ye awaaz hai, ye VO hai, right? So then the viewer has that in the back of it's stored in the memory bank. So next time the voice comes, they automatically know that it's VO.
This is also where designing comes into play. You can centralize the sound, which will make you feel that it is not coming from any A direction, it is just in the center. So you can use VO as the central sound, but when you're giving sound to your characters or what you've recorded, then you place it where the character is. So it is coming from that particular direction, it is bouncing off and feeling as if it's the right environment. So that's where designing comes into play.
But sound is, I mean, it's hugely big tool. So please start paying sound designers more.
Sorry, please. No, last year we had this, I think last year or the year before, we had the same session with Film Bazaar, where Rahman had come, we had
Le Musk.
Yeah. The point I'd like to ask is the physiological impact of viewing VR and all that, and the psychological impact. For me, it is strenuous.
It is, yeah.
Quite strenuous because not as a person, I've been observing this VR, whatever evolution for a while now. Being a psychologist, I feel that it is quite a strain on the eyes and on the body.
So the strain on the strain on the eyes is primarily because as any technology evolves, right? The viewing devices, they get better. So when I remember as a child, when I went to see picture, इतने scratches होते थे वो print में, कुछ दिखता नहीं था, कुछ सुनाई नहीं देता था. Half the sprockets would be broken, right? So I mean now तो everything is crystal clear, एकदम चकाचक. So VR is like that. We are in that stage right now. We are in the 2G mobile stage of VR. तो 2G mobile पे कैसे गंदा दिखता था, वैसे अभी VR है. 18 महीने में fantastic हो जाए. You won't believe it. You will laugh and say, अरे यार उस टाइम पे कितना गंदा दिखता था, right? So
my question was, what is the research?
Oh, there's lots of research. Lots of work has been done. So he was talking about other uses of VR, right? So in the medical world, for example, the burn victims. So it's third degree burn is 8 on a pain scale, right? With medication, they bring it down to 4. But even 4 is unsustainable for a conscious human, which is why you have to sedate the person while the burns heal, right? And that sedation causes, deprivation of oxygen to the brain, etc., etc., etc. When you put them in a VR headset with snow and wind sounds and cold visuals, it actually brings the pain level from 4 to 2. So you can be conscious, interact with family, touch people, talk, maybe even, right? And then for a few hours, and then you go back under, and then you come back under, and go. So it's used in so many. It's used for PTSD. It's used for all these things. So the complete psychological study of films अभी तक नहीं हुआ है. 150 साल से पिक्चर बन रहा है. तो अभी VR को होने में भी टाइम लगेगा. But it's